Welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Mary Wheel, Chair of the committee. The meeting's not being live streamed on YouTube, but it is being recorded and will be available to watch later. I'd like to welcome all of those here today in Committee Room 1 at Kensington Town Hall. I ask you all to make sure that your mobiles and your computers are on silent or switched off, because we're going to start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those lives lost in the Grenfell tragedy.
Thank you.
I received apologies for absence from councillors Mo Bactier and Lucy Knight. Does any member have an interest in document? The minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated. Simon
Great. I have a couple of points, if I may. On page 4, looking at points 2 and 3, I'm wondering, was there any response or action on those 2 points? Point number 4, it says the re-established Grenfell Assembly hasn't been re-established yet. And I think that needs to be made clear. And it says it should be used as a forum to discuss the council, but I think we need to be clear it's a forum for residents, because the previous Grenfell Assembly, the agenda was dictated by the council, and I think we need to have something which is a little bit more of a two-way street. I think that's been understood.
Not sure whether
so a forum for residents, just for accuracy there on residents. I think number 6 is made clear later on, but it is really important that we are clear at all times that the future Grenfell support is part of the global settlement agreement and not funding from the council. I know there's been some confusion, including I think on speaking committees around that, and residents need to be very clear. And finally,
you're rattling through it a bit too quickly for me, Claire. The first point you made is basically request for a response, not a matter of the.
Well, I was just wondering, is that accurate? Was there no response given?
So, in terms of the accuracy of what's written here,
that's what I'm asking. Is that accurate? Could we review that?
So,
and if,
so that's points 2
and 3 on page 4.
Right.
If there was any response given, it would be great to have that minuted. If there wasn't, then I would like to request the response. So that's 3 and 4.
Can I also make a point, please, that there hasn't been any confusion in the committees? I think Claire's making a point about my question at the last meeting.
No, I wasn't actually.
Well, I'm going to make the point anyway that there was a little bit of confusion about my question, but the question was designed to elicit the answer that I was expecting out of the league member, not to reveal any knowledge from anybody else. So I'm just going to put that on the record.
Still not clear what amendment is requested on that one.
On what one?
Have you got? Sorry,
Yeah, you've written this down.
Yes.
And then I think 4 is a suggested change.
Yeah. Your suggested change was
4 residents.
Suggested that the re-establishment of
Yeah. So A, it hasn't been re-established yet.
I think it's talking about something to happen in the future.
Yeah, it needs to be clear that that's what it is, because it implies here that we have a Grenfell Assembly and we don't currently.
That's not my implication, but I'm happy to make it clearer.
Thank you.
So suggested that the future re-establishment of the Grantham Assembly,
Yeah,
would
perfect.
that be all right?
Perfect.
Can we be clear that what I'm doing is to make changes that reflect what was said at the meeting clearer, rather than actually changing what was said at the meeting.
Yes, and I think my reading of that was it did mean the future. Claire is saying that it's not clear enough that it means the future, and so I'm happy to add the word future
Because they
in
meant
that.
the future, so then it should be
So
clear.
that is an amendment to
Thank
Paul. And then, sorry, what was the next one?
And then on page 7.7, there's no mention of defensiveness. So if you remember, I
It's
asked.
not word by word.
I know. It's we all know it's not verbatim. Nevertheless, it was, I think, an important point in terms of understanding why we had complaints being escalated to stage 2. There was
The
question
rest of the meeting, think that we ought to add the word defensiveness there?
No. And can I suggest that if members do have comments on the meeting, it'd be helpful if they put them in by email before the meeting, so we can all think about them.
Yes, it's quite a lot to digest.
it's just 3 points.
And what was the next one?
That was
That was it.
So it was an important point in terms of, as a committee, and as residents, being able to understand what is the obstacle, why are we having escalations to stage 2. A member asked the question, asked about defensiveness, and that was an important point that the officers acknowledged. So in terms of the work to improve matters, I think it's important that as a committee we minute that. That was all I had on the minutes, Mary.
Thank you. The rest of the meeting, I've made one amendment, I'm sorry. Thank you. So we've done the minutes. We're now going to have the maxilla report. So I'll ask officers to come forward first. I'm going to change the agenda order and bring the community safety plan after this report. So we're going to have the maxilla report first. We've got lots of people here waiting for it. So have we got the officers? This is where I was expecting to see officers and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask just to introduce this paper, and then those of you who looked at your agendas will see that maximum CIC have also contributed as photograph. And I'm going to ask them to come and introduce their paper. I talked to it, assuming everybody's read it. And similarly, I'm assuming everybody has read your report, so I'm just looking for a few words of introduction.
Okay, happy to. Thank you, committee. This report essentially sets out the latest update on developments of the Maxilla site, following on from a committee meeting last year in terms of reflections about the viability of the adult social care hub staying at that site, and it sets out some of the work the property team have done in partnership with adult social care in terms of thinking about alternative options, and sets out what that might mean for how we continue to work with Maxilla CIC about what happens at the Maxilla site itself.
Thank you. Emma or Sarah, do you want to add anything?
Only that I think when we last came before you, we were given a very clear steer about what you wanted us to come back with, particularly on adult social care. I think everyone felt, and I agreed, I think we agreed that there's a sense of urgency about finding a solution to that. And so I hope that paper offers up some of those, is some progress in answering, what you asked us to do.
Great, thank you. Would you like to come forward, and are you all going to come? 1, 2? Yeah, we can
Yeah.
So this is we're introducing Appendix A. Want to quickly introduce yourselves?
Tayshan, Director of Maxilla City and local resident.
I'm Bashir, I'm also a director of Maxilla City and local resident, and Zach is.
I'm Zaki, I'm sorry, I'm just not feeling the best, so I'm just going to sit.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the time today. I think it's important that we have voice in these spaces and in these meetings, and also thank you for accommodating the papers, which was really helpful. And I hope that gives some good context to everyone in the room as to our experience and our journey to get to this point. As you'll see, it is a distinguished experience and journey to project to Callum and the councillors. We've got to this point where there's a lack of clarity on a few different things, and I think these things are really important in the next steps that we need to take. I think there's a problem that we are now being brought into to try and solve, which was only a problem as a result of decisions made by the project officer and councillor at the time. And I'm speaking directly to the demolition of the space as it was, which myself and Zakia were part of at the time, and other people in this room were involved in. And we're talking about extremely sensitive artwork following Grenfell when the community came into that building, a community building, and was used as a place of therapy, a place of unity, and a place of creative expression by young people. And I was shocked when I walked into that building to see that it had been pulled apart and completely stripped of any life. And not only was the artwork, that sensitive artwork, destroyed, but the building has been made to be dysfunctional. And when you look at the plumbing, you look at the electrics, there is none. And so whilst adult social care's involvement required a redevelopment, a complete rethink of the space because of the high spec needed and required by adult social care. So we're talking about access, we're talking about the way that doors are kind of locked and security and health and safety. Where we found ourselves is that there is no longer a need for adult social care in that space. There are more appropriate spaces. Bay 17 to 19 is no longer a safe space for adult social care as established by following a conversation with the TFL. And so we're now in a place where if that building hadn't been demolished in the way it had been, it would be accessible. We could walk into it today and it could be, yeah, sure, it's not perfect, but it could have been refurbished, it could have been updated, improved to speak to the current need here and today of youth services in the local area. And that was my understanding of my involvement at Maxilla City, was that we were a group of young people in the area, majority of us involved in the legacy of what was called Latino City at the time, where young people went into that space and used it to respond to the tragedy of Grenfell. Yet here we are speaking about an unfunded piece of work that needs to happen to get the building back to where it was. We saw it full of colour, full of life, full of use at a time of desperate need. And I think we are finding it, we're concerned that we've got to this point now where funding was raised in the name of Maxilla City, funding was named in the name of Grenfell, a Grenfell Legacy project. Yet
Can you
now
just
there's
clarify that when you're talking about funding
Yeah.
raised, because I've wondered about that in your thing. Is this some charity funding or KCSC or?
So we accept that there was a adult social care precedes our involvement in Bay 17 to 19. So there was already intention and there was already a proposal and a plan. I don't need to explain that. And with that came a ring-fenced amount, with also an intention to raise more funding to meet, I think it was a £12 million budget. Right? And I think the £8 million that was ring-fenced for the development of Maxilla's for Bay 17 to 19. Now that adult social care, it's been established that adult social care is moving away from Bay 17 to 19. We're now asking the question, as a result of, I guess, that fundraising strategy, where we acknowledge that a majority of that funding should be allocated to adult social care. But now for us to be told that Bay 17 to 19 has a total budget of zero, I think that has become quite concerning to us. And then when you then add that to this kind of default position of Ballymore's development causing inconvenience to community space and Maxilla being the kind of solution to that. I mean, the only reason why Callum is in, well, and you can correct me if you'd like to, but I feel like this project has been made a mess of prior to Callum's involvement. And I feel like Callum's involvement has very much been a risk mitigation strategy from the council to ensure that we're at arm's length and that we are able to communicate so that everyone's in the loop with what we're doing and how things are moving. We only came to find out about the intentions around Canalside House coming into the building through whispers through the community. Yet this has been named as a one of the kind partnership between the council and Maxilla City. That was what we all stepped into. That's what I believe I stepped into. And so this default position that Canalside House tenants are to move into Bay 17 to 19 without any prior engagement or consultation, any wider strategy or conversation. Again, that was disappointing for us to find out in the way that we did. And I think going forwards, it's important to for everyone to acknowledge that Maxilla City is completely independent of this Ballymore development, completely independent of any inconvenience caused as a result of that Ballymore development. It's not been approved by GLA yet, and actually Maxilla City directors have direct involvement with the GLA, and we're having open discussions about what that looks like. I'm not saying that we can change the world and we can change those decisions, but we're definitely at the tables having those discussions. I think it's important that the committee acknowledge through the next steps that we're taking, that these things are not by default, and understand the journey of how we've got to this point, which has completely devalued, dismissed, and sidestepped us as local residents, as community members who've stepped into a space as a result of the Grenfell tragedy. You know, we're all local residents, we're all young people, and we want to see this space used for young people who have been impacted by Grenfell, not as a convenient solution to a problem which, I don't know, releases Section 106 money due to Canalside tenants being moved into another space. And so I'm just being very open and honest in the spirit of the new way that we're going to take steps forward. I think there is, and maybe I'll hand over to Bashir to.
Yes, I think what Tation's covered fundamentally is a few questions that we would want to put to the scrutiny committee, one of which being, in the 9 months since February that we were here, I mean, the table of options that we can see here, does the scrutiny committee consider that to be 9 months worth of feasibility study or options gathering? And does that actually highlight the sort of detailed feedback that the scrutiny committee requested, now that Maxilla City can no longer be used as the excuse for passing time and causing discomfort? So another question that Tation already highlighted as well was, since the two projects have been delineated as a result of that meeting, also no reconciliatory funding has been allocated to Maxilla project, so Bay 17 to 19 distinctly, to use as a sort of benchmark in order to redevelop that space or look to. And something that I asked in that February meeting was a feasibility study. Those conversations are being had, and admittedly Callum is warm to that conversation, but just to make the point clear, we've not commenced that. We're still asking for that and hope to get that. And one of the fundamental points also raised was the idea of decisions that have generated avoidable cost, and namely the decision to strip a functional space. And there is a cost to that. And my question to the committee also is, have you been cited of those demolition costs? And has that been considered also in its impact to then refurbish the space?
Thank you. Now, it seems to me that this paper basically falls into two bits now, because we're separating off the adult social care and the Maxilla site. We've got the first part of the paper dwells on the alternative, the potential sites for adult social care, which obviously is very important. And the second part of the paper deals with what happens to the bays. So can I suggest we have 2 rounds of questions, and we start by looking at and people may not have a question on one of them, but if you have a question about the basically the sort of paragraph 5, the adult social care, the options, and I know I do, we could ask those first and then come back and spend time on the maximum aspect of it. As we've been given something to think about while we're doing that. So who would like to ask if everyone's happy with that approach? Greg, and Lucy.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I think my question is largely for Emma, and about to what extent we've got costings associated with each of the various options that are presented in the paper. And in particular, for those options that don't involve the 1 to 9 St Mark's Road site, is the value of the St Mark's Road site in full being taken into account? I mean, could it be, it's not going to be used, could it be sold to pay for not only our social care, but also to provide a budget for Max Hill? Sorry for mentioning something I should have done there, Chair. We're in two halves. Or alternatively, could that be thrown into the new homes programme as a site, given the desperate shortage for housing we've got in London? So those are the four sides.
I'm going to have to start with the first one, and Helen may say something different from me. I have not seen costings for these different potential sites, and my understanding, and Helen may say something different, is because the building required is quite particular in terms of its high ceilings for hoist and space amount. We really were just in the first instance going out to find a building or buildings that could even work before we considered the cost. And actually what this paper narrows that down. And the idea was then one or two buildings emerged we thought could actually work. I obviously hope to find lots of them. It's been very, very difficult to find. I think that's the first thing for me. It's been very difficult to find a building that we think will work for what is one of our most important services. Then we would do further work on costing and feasibility. Is that right?
That is right.
There
There is a sort of broad level sort of RAG rating of expense assessment done based on how fit for use the building is currently now, how much work would be required, and would it require a big rebuild. So categorisation, yes, but not absolute cost.
A very early stage then in determining the way.
And then your second question about St Mark's. Everything you say is true, but no decisions have been taken about that building, really. I mean, the priority is really finding a new home for the ASC. That's where we are with that.
Well, I'm sure that's all important. I mean, I guess taking into account the value of the building is important. You take into account and its potential use as well, whether it be for adult social care or housing or something else.
I think that was originally the plan. The budget was on that building. I seem to remember some time ago. Yeah,
pre my involvement, and I'm sure I haven't discussed it with officers. I'm sure it's we will get to it, but I think once we've got costings for everything, then we can start thinking about how we're going to pay for things, not least with the council's current financial position.
And can I just clarify on that second part? I know this is about the adult social care section, but if it was raised, I think it's worth mentioning that any funding raised at this point should be in addition to a previous, and I think that's the detail that we want to understand, is that I think by default we've kind of been told that there's a budget of zero for the development of Bay 17 to 19, whatever that may look like, and the work that we need to do to establish what groups could benefit from that. From Bay 17 to 19, I think any funding raised should be in addition to whatever funding is to be allocated that has already been raised for Bay 17 to 19, which I think requires further discussion around what is that ring fence and what portion of that is to be allocated to Bay 17 to 19. Because I say that with the caveat that we wholeheartedly understand the need to prioritise adult social care, but I don't think it's 100% adult social care, 0% Bay 17 to 19, starting from zero, because we've been part of this for 5 years, and Latham City preceded that. So,
thank you very much. And I wanted to really agree with Bashia's question about is this paper on the options for adult social care, is it really detailed enough in terms of feasibility? I was going to say something also about the cost, which costs are mentioned, and there must be some basis, but I understand the answer to that. The thing that's concerning me most is the lack of transparency here in terms of how the council has acted. I think you alluded to that as well. We talk about stakeholders, key stakeholders, 5.7. The short list of potential sites for the learning disability and autism day centre was developed through consultation with key stakeholders. Now, I don't know who those key stakeholders were. A lot of this paper is extremely vague, which I think is not good for us to be able to do our full scrutiny on. But I believe those key stakeholders were not deemed to be the ward councillors of any of these places. When I think about Unit 12, when I think about Lower Wood Court, as for St Cuthbert's, I mean, we can skip over that one. But I am concerned that the process is not transparent or respectful to the community. And we do have a history of, at this council, of treating North Kensington like personal fiefdom and playing God with all our means and assets.
Can I ask Callum to clarify who the stakeholders are in that?
So the stakeholders, as I understand it from property colleagues, are essentially the adult social care leads of the service predominantly. Conversations did happen far too late with all councillors.
Last week.
Last week.
Which we acknowledged.
Why was that?
I think there's a sort of fundamental to some of these questions about how well, just being completely transparent, this project has been managed end to end. I don't think any of us would ideally like to be here this many years on post the end of Latimer City. I think there are many learning opportunities that are sort of set out through this arrangement. And
So why was that? Why were the ward councillors contacted so late? And some ward councillors who actually sought information were denied it. Why would that be?
So I think partly it's to do with managing the different opportunities and options that are set out in the process. It's not an excuse. So absolutely, in my mind, as soon as options are being looked at seriously, particularly when we were doing site visits and considering those, ward councillors should be involved in those processes. Of course they should.
So why should they be told that they may not have the information?
I don't know the detail. I don't know the detail of that.
Okay. I mean, I just want to really note that this is really not acceptable, especially in a council which is supposed to be changing after Grenfell.
Absolutely.
I'm just really shocked
to
to
look into Claire's concern
Of
that
course.
an inquiry was actually rebuffed. If you could have a look.
Yeah, that doesn't
And
sound like a
before
short
we
time.
move on, can I just draw Greg's attention to something which may be of interest to the committee, vis-a-vis 1 to 9 St Mark's Road. You've probably seen this, Greg. It talks about the longer term plans for the site, and this is in my ward. No, nothing about it. No one's talked to me about it. Not recommended for further consideration. Costs involved to repair and refurbish a building that is reaching the end of its economic life. So when we're interested in the cost of buildings, say, pertinent to that is the fact that it's being alluded to here that the council seem to have some future plans that we perhaps are not being spoken about.
All I can say is I have had no conversations about the future of this building. I think
but
that's
I
what
refer
that
to here.
Can I finish, please? Thank you. I think all that it's saying there, and I didn't write this paper, is that it's a building that's in poor condition, and as it's currently, there's issues with the heating, all sorts of things. Something needs to be done about it. But
Yes, I think we all. I think
that's
we all,
what I
we
think
all,
at the end
we
of
all
its
agree that,
economic life.
absolutely. But
I
I'm
think that's what that
concerned
means.
in terms of us considering these options. If the first option available, which is to do work on 1 to 9 St Mark's Road, we're kind of being told that that's not recommended because the building is reaching the end of its economic life. So that's actually quite pertinent to our considerations, isn't it?
So I think what's really important for adult social care is they need to identify a site they can really do one move, not move somewhere and then move again. And I can't remember which year it was when I was the lead member of adult social care. We spent a lot of time with the service users and their families, talking to them and working out what they wanted, what would be the best for them. And so a lot of work went into that. And unfortunately, we weren't able at that point to identify, there was only Maxilla, base 17 to 19 available. That obviously then changed when EFL came in with their issue around the maintenance. But I think it's really, we need to identify buildings where they could go. Once we've done that, we can then look at the rest of it. It's like having a Rubik's Cube and trying to get
it's
everything to line up.
complicated. Many moving parts, but many of these buildings were there at that time. Unit 12 hasn't just popped up, for instance. So
No, but it was in use.
still is. Under the
Yeah,
same
no,
terms.
We didn't own it, we
then.
didn't own it. It was bought subsequently.
Scrutiny.
Thank you. I do appreciate that this paper is very, all the options are very embryonic. So thank you for, reading it. But I must say, I would have loved to have had some indication of cost, not exact figures, but just some indication. I do understand even the property Callum, you were trying to say, the reason you haven't engaged everyone, because I think there could be market sensitivity, and so I don't blame you for not involving councillors, because there is market
I beg
sensitivity.
your pardon, excuse me. I beg your pardon.
No, sorry, if I may finish, because once, I'm sure that might have been one of the thinking behind it. I think the cost would have been, and the time frame would have been a bit helpful. It says 12 to 15 months and 12 to 18 months. Again, the time frame is a bit vague. And my other question would have been is, I think it was St. Cuthbert's School, which has 500 square meters of space. I mean, that looks pretty the obvious choice. But again, that costs and everything. So I think I would have liked a bit more information on it.
And I guess and we can definitely ask the property team to prepare that. Partly, some of the options, as you look at them, we try to show them transparently. As soon as you look at them, they're not really that viable. So a couple that's felt like a good option, and they've already got plans for the utilisation of it. It's not in our kit for how you manage them. So we made some representations. We did that. We tried to articulate that was one of the areas we looked at. Some of the other conversations, as Councillor Simmons rightly highlights, one of the potential destinations for the adult social care site is a building that is currently tenanted and used. It's a tenancy
By a Grenfell legacy organisation.
At will, and so some of there's sensitivities in all of these areas. And in the reality, when you begin to start to think about how you solve one problem, if there aren't, as I think everyone would be pleased to know, hundreds of buildings that are sitting empty that we can then completely move people into. So everything is a equation and everything has a sequence. And so we should do better at involving ward councillors. We should be better at being transparent as we go through that process. But any which way you try and move this equation, there are huge numbers of sensitivities that we're also trying to be respectful of, and not least acknowledge that we don't get them all right.
Joanna. Can I just let the committee ask that question? Sorry. Joanna,
I think it's been slightly talked about, but it's actually time for adults social care to move.
Yes.
Because I read this and you're focusing on costs, which I completely get, but I also look at when do they need a service, and when do they need to be moved by. And I appreciate you said single mother the easiest, but again, that's not particularly coming through what these timeframes are with the blue, mediums and shorts.
Yep.
And actually, can we have more clarity on that?
So if you remember, the original planning for this was in 2016. I mean, Mary, I think you were the lead member.
I was when I started off on this project.
So we've been hearing, that this is not, the building is not fit for purpose since then. If you go there, they have to get down to the next level.
But I think
So
Joanna's
is that
point
not the
was
question that actually you need to move them sooner rather than later? It
Right.
appears that maybe more than one move.
Well,
In which case, so that's,
but you're dealing
that's
with
where I'm coming from.
very vulnerable people with quite complex needs. And so for them, it would be better to have one much better one move.
Yeah, so I don't think that's coming through
Okay,
well enough.
Okay.
To avoid their time, but they're needing and in terms of use.
I also wanted to identify clarification of a couple of things. There has been some proactive view when the council actually knew about the maintenance requirements for the columns in today's area. Callum, are you able to confirm the date when the council was?
No, bluntly, no.
I can.
I can tell you when I was told.
It was September 2024, so it was just before we came to scrutiny in the new year.
We had a scrutiny meeting in February, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
Of 2025. And therefore, for the design team, professionals, whatever, to digest the implications of that input of technical information by TfL September 24, do that, produce a report, which is digested by officers internally with the other dimensions than purely design and planning. And then that to go into a policy discussion with the leadership team. I hesitate to say it, but I think that is probably reasonably normal progress at that time, about 5 months for that to happen. Therefore, if what I've heard confirmed at September 34, then we scrutinised it in February 35, and that was a firm presentation of why adult social care could not go onto the phased area for right or wrong, previous history, due respect to what's been said before about what did and done. That then becomes a firm decision in principle about the fact that we have a report back in that scrutiny committee of the fact that adult social care couldn't stay in their current place. Yep. It's not fit for purpose, doesn't have the right lived accesses and disabilities, access and so on. And it's an essential and part of it's a statutory service to the community. Mm-hmm. And therefore it's a prime objective of the council to ensure that is continued for the benefit of the community, both that it's required to statutorily, but also in policy terms as a high priority. If the decision, if the advice and the explanation to the scrutiny panel in February 25 was that it couldn't stay there and it couldn't go to Maxilla. The key thing therefore is where does it go in the interest of preserving that service to some very vulnerable people in our community, mm-hmm. and also a wider service to people who are perhaps less vulnerable than most vulnerable, need to be looked after and be prepared for, because otherwise their difficulties will develop into more difficult ones and have further applications. So from an adult social care point of view, it seems that this search for other places to go to is it's not just a reasonable thing to do, it's an essential priority to do. Now, looking forward into the range of buildings that have been proposed, the idea that one would move somewhere twice with that complexity of service. I mean, I am not involved in that sort of thing, but I am involved in the school that has the SEN and the autism unit in it. And if we ever had to move that unit, it would be very complex. And the one thing we would not want to do for the security of the children concerned would be to move it more than once. Not only just for the children, but for the parents and wider communities as well. And therefore, there seems to be a strong suggestion, and it hasn't been worked out in detail. And the information we have here is largely qualitative, but it does have a numerate element, which I would like clarification also. On page 23, 5.9, section 2, single move solution using unit 12 up in the road, which could be available at circa 12 to 18 months. And then it goes on to say, once taken possession of secured and works complete. From today, how long would it be? Is it 12 to 18 months? Or is it 12 to 18 months after certain things have been put in place? I'm not clear on that. That's my question.
I think from speaking to the team, it's 12 to 18 months from today if we were quite quickly making a decision to exercise our right to ask the current people to move.
And then the subsequent question to that is that the right, the best we can do for adult social care and that community vital service, statutorily vital service? And if it is the best that we can do, it puts a high priority on looking further in detail at that site, unless there are other ones that come up to the same mark. When it's looking at a sort of decision tree here, from where we are now, right or wrong, to where we have to be statutorily and for responsibility.
Yeah. So I know my other social care colleagues would like to have been there, but they did send me some bullet points, and they were very clear that in all the properties that they've seen, there were robbers and they dismissed that and earlier on. The Unit 12 Latimer is the front foremost, the one they would like to go to. What they would like us to get to is a position where we as a council start to think about what that means for the current incumbents, because that's a difficult conversation, as Councillor Simon rightly highlights. But then also start to include the families, the individual users themselves in some of those conversations. I think what we don't want to do is we don't want to be doing that at a time where we're not at least sort of pretty confident that that would be a viable place, because I think it's cruel, to be honest, to be articulating new opportunities that may never materialise. But I think your question rightly highlights the importance of Maxilla. For a long time, for too long, on our corporate performance RAG ratings, Maxilla has flashed red. And so that is why I think I can publicly comfortably say it is not a project that is going as well as we would like. No, but it's a project that absolutely has to be gripped and it has to be changed. And we can't get the situation again.
I think I'm going down that line of questioning purely in relation to the importance of achieving for those vulnerable people statutory requirements. But at the same time, the other aspect of Maxilla, which joins it to the other part of the paper, is the respect for the lessons learned and what's happened to date. But what I was trying to look at it was in terms of simply sort of straightforward where adult social care is, and we're talking about the adult social care part of the paper. So you're saying that it's 12 to 18 months from now, that could be achieved.
That is my understanding also.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, basically almost all of these are recommended for further consideration, but I think as a result of this conversation, I think there's a clear understanding that one move really is the only option and that we shouldn't be looking at. I think our recommendation as a committee would be that we don't look at two stages. Claire.
Thank you. Speaking of recommendations,
Can I just finish? I was going to ask a question as well. So can I just finish? So I think, and with that in mind, that kind of knocks out a couple of recommendations anyway, because quite a lot of them say, almost all of them say recommended for further consideration, and that's because they're the ones on this paper rather than the ones that were dismissed before the paper, and I get that. But I think as a result of this conversation, it looks to me, and that's sort of my question, would you agree that the two in table 2 are really the most likely options? And why is Lowerwood Court a back runner compared to Unit 12? Or wasn't really, was it because it's dark?
I think it is to do with the usability of the space and the experience the users would have.
And there's some access issues as well.
May I ask a follow-up on that specific?
Yes.
Thank you. So about the call, this is slightly to underline the transparency process. So that space has been empty for 5 years. I think before I've been a councillor anyway, I went to a meeting very early, in my time as a councillor about it. I recently inquired about the space. This wasn't actually about the social care use. And I was told by the team leader that no, we're not prepared to have a conversation with you about it. Now I don't like, losing my rag, but I did send pretty stern response saying, I'm sorry, I'm a democratically elected representative. This is a public asset in my ward. Yeah, you will have a conversation. So we eventually did. And the information I have about it is from last year, when there was essentially viability into its use as a potential commercial space. Now, I have a little information for that, but it does slightly contradict what the report says about significant costs. There will be costs involved in making it accessible, basically. But the tone of what I've read, or the gist of what I read, was that this is quite absorbable by us. Actually, not a huge project. Also mentioned a planning commission, and I mean, I don't know, I've sat on enough planning committees at this stage, which have been brought, because the council is the applicant. So I'm wondering again why it's taken this long to find use for Lowood. I understand it's not top of the list, but it's still recommended for further use. And it
Katie,
seems
that's
like
a question for property outside of this meeting.
Okay,
Emma, will you take that one away?
And I'm happy, I didn't know that you'd asked for that information. I don't know which properties, but I'm really happy for you to not directly CC me in and we can have that conversation.
okay, great. Well, I appreciate it. It does fall under social investment, and that was part of the answer I was given, was it's being considered purchase.
So I think we've had a good discussion of the alternative sites for adult social care, and I think we've made our views clear.
Can I just add one piece in? Maybe be a recommendation. We are thinking the option for Unit 12 is going to be the way to go, or the most feasible. I want to make sure the committee are aware that the current occupants of that building is Kids on the Green, and I don't know if that means anything to any of you. That building is not currently accessible, so I don't know how it compares to Lowood Court. And I know that because they have been asking the council to make it accessible for years, and that wasn't an option. So there will be work required to make that building accessible. I'm sure you already know this. But so I want to make sure that the committee are really clear about who's actually in there. And I think we should, as the responsible council, be making a recommendation that should that be the option that ends up going ahead, then we need to really, really manage the move for that organisation. However that looks like, whatever it is, we need to be transparent about it, and we need to include ward councillors. And I really am kind of getting tired of saying we have to include ward councillors, but it clearly seems to be some sort of institutional problem, and we need to make sure the organisation and its users are looked after with respect, because I think, as we've seen with other organisations like the school that we closed, sometimes the council can be rather heavy-handed and have due concern for the people who impact. So
I'm happy to add a recommendation that council makes a particular effort for transparency in discussions with the current incumbent.
And as the chair of HCSC, I would like to be kept appraised of all developments on that front.
So now I'd like to turn to, sorry, did you want to ask a question about the adult social care? Let's move on to the back.
I just want a quick point following on from what Claire was saying. And I would very much like Councillor Hood to withdraw her comment that you don't blame them for not engaging ward councillors. The Kroll report on various transactions that were carried out before Grenfell was very, very critical of the council for not engaging ward councillors. I remember when we were looking for a new site for a school, I went round with Dominic Johnson, who was the lead on education, and we went round together looking at sites. We worked together then. We weren't treated as people who were going to be difficult road councillors, which was the term that the council's lawyers used about myself and Councillor Mason when they were looking at the college, Kensington Chelsea College purchase. We were deliberately kept out of that. Those days are over. So please withdraw that. We would rather work with you. And this is literally, I found out after the planning meeting about the potential move of the Canal Side House tenancy to Maxilla. It is completely inappropriate. We should be working together, and total transparency is nothing makes us more angry and distrustful than that kind of situation. On that front, Emma, I was merely saying this. I have had in my ward similar reasons, and maybe I should phrase it as that the reason sometimes we are not involved was it because market sensitivity and the operative word. If you remember what I said, this for me I see it as an embryonic stage, and because it's an embryonic stage, I am all for transparency.
We've accepted that
keep confidentiality where we have to. We signed up for that. We do not break confidentiality.
I would really
so we should be part of the conversation, not kept out.
Were there any other questions on the adult social care side of the paper, or can we move on from that?
Just private committees and really choice councillors and informed. I have already met with Zoe, who runs.
I know you have.
And I spoke to her personally, and I thought that was very important.
Yes, you gave her a hug, I know.
I did, because I'm not unaware of, you know, that they're an important organisation, and I have already said that I will meet with her again, absolutely, in the new year to talk through exactly issues.
Thank you, because I understood following that meeting, I the day after, that there was no support or help or anything about where are you going to go. They have some really good assets in that building for young people, which, given what council have done to Maxilla Bays, as it was completely destroyed in there, I don't want to see the same thing happen to all the resources that we have.
Which is great. Now, I'd like to,
and please do keep me appraised.
I would like to move on
I've
to
got
the
very-
Maxilla.
I've got-
Can I just move on to?
This is a very quick question, how long will it take to get the costings for these proposals? That are suggested?
The adult social care.
Yeah, the social care proposals.
And what the recommendations are.
I mean,
Yeah, that-
I'll probably, we don't know, probably here. I think with Zoe's permission, we would, which welcome during the year, we need to go and spend a bit of time in the building, look at the building, start to assess the building, if that's what the committee are recommending. And that would, I
We're
guess.
not recommending any particular building.
No, we're not.
We are, all we're recommending is one move.
So I don't know the answer.
But I think we gleaned that probably those two are the front runners, but that's all we would say.
I don't have to.
And maybe when you've got a sort of timeline, a more comprehensive timeline, which includes not only the planning and the costing, but the build, that's something you'd share with the committee. So perhaps, Luke, if you'd make a note of that we'd share the timeline. So
Did it refurbishment, sorry, the cost of making Lowood accessible, specifically, I'd really like to know that one.
So,
I don't know.
if we can move on, because everyone's been waiting to talk about Maxilla very patiently. And we've discussed what is a very important service, but we're now moving on really to paragraph 6 of the report. So colleagues, who's got questions on that? Ask the question. Beth.
I would like to ask, does this meet the threshold for a Section 5 report under the Local Government and Housing Act 1989?
Section what?
Section 5 report under the Local Government and Housing Act 1989. This is a value for money review, examination of grant and commissioning frameworks, consideration of conflicts of interest and influence.
This, when you say this suggestion, this was the proposal in here.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you comment on that?
I not without doing some research about exactly what that clause is. Do you know more about?
It is a report on a value for money review, examination of grant and commissioning frameworks, consideration of conflicts of interest and influence.
Absolutely.
And the reason why I'm asking this is because of the history of Maxilla Bays from 2016 to now. Some of which has been documented in The Guardian, as you might know, but it has been characterised by, I'm going to say, to be generous, a lack of transparency. I think some very dubious things occurred in the journey from here to now.
Okay.
And I think that the council need to be able to demonstrate compliance. And I would like to ask you to.
So if I can ask Callum to come back to the committee in written form after the meeting to sort of address the complexities. Preeti, did I have you to the question?
Yeah, sure. Again, a question more for Callum and Emma. I agree that the lack of transparency, clarity is, and I'm hoping this has gone for too long. And I hear exactly what Taishan and Bashir says, and I sympathize. And can you give us absolute, confirmation that going forward, there will be clarity, there will be transparency, and there will be a good consultation and dialogue between the two.
between the council and
Yes,
the CIC.
yes.
Absolutely, of course. And I think the paper tries to acknowledge that the place where the relationship got to with the CIC is not at all where we would have wanted it to have got to. And I think that's happened over a period of time, which no doubt is behind some of the other questions. I'm personally committed. I personally meet with the CIC every 2 weeks. I know there's more than just transparency with the CIC. Some of the other points about making sure all the councillors and other stakeholders are involved in those conversations. But absolutely, we've agreed together joint working principles around transparency, around the goals, the outcomes we're trying to solve. There's absolutely different viewpoints still within that spectrum, but I would hope that we are in a much better place in terms of managing that relationship.
And just a quick question too. How do you both feel we're here right now, and do you feel comforted by it?
I think that we shouldn't be complacent by the irregular meetings. That should not be the optimal standard of this partnership. I think the reasons why in which we took a step into this space is to see outcomes of a community space delivered as a Grenfell legacy project on behalf of the Grenfell community. And I think that has been distorted. It's been pushed and pulled. We've been underestimated. And I think there's probably a view, or has been, or was a view, that we may be exhausted by this point, and we may not be in this room at this point. We're in this room. We'll continue to be in this room. I think the longer that the council underestimate us as young people, as an organisation in the community, it will come at more of a cost to the council to try and mitigate those risks or those problems. Actually, touching what Emma said, if we just work collaboratively, if we work openly and transparently, it will become a lot easier for councillors, project officers, because we have skills, we have experiences, we have expertise that the council may not have. And actually, if we lean on one another, we can achieve a collaborative outcome efficiently. And I do, on that point, I want to pick up on something that was said earlier around, and maybe it was said, but it wasn't that the TFL popped up. I think there was a comment made about the TFL popped up and said that this building wasn't used. TFL are the freeholders of this space. And actually, I think as learning for any council project, when it comes to assets, you would think that in 2015 or 2014, whenever this proposal was put forward, the first thing that you would ask is the freehold. Is this building suitable for said service? And it's shocking to me that, and it would be good maybe as Scrutiny committee to understand the numbers and how much had been invested under the guise that adult social care was going to move into Bay 17 to 19 on the premise that it was a safe and suitable building. The first question I would have asked was, is this a suitable building for this service group? And at the very first junction, you would have found out no. So this has wasted a lot of time, a lot of energy. We've been on this journey for 5 years.
I mean, sorry, I don't mean to cut you short, but evidently, of course, we know there have been mistakes made, and we've been as mistakes.
Sorry, can I say?
Mistakes.
Can I let the lead member respond to that?
I'm happy to go and clarify this. I wasn't involved with the project in 2015. Let me finish and explain why I'm saying that. Otherwise, I would be able to tell you more categorically now. My understanding, when we were told last year that the TFL said about the issue of the pillars, is that was a change from TFL. So in 2015, I've said I'll go away and clarify. I'm just telling you what my understanding is. That in 2015, I believe TFL were consulted with, and that wasn't an issue. If that's not the case, we'll find out and we'll come back to you. But that I heard about the pillar issue in 24, and my understanding was it was a new problem. But as I say, we'll go away and find out. There's no point us.
I can tell you because I spent an hour with the TFL last week, and the person in charge happens to be a family friend of mine, which is by chance. And he took me up to Westway Studios, and he said, "This what they've done here is perfect. Where they have full ceilings, they can be removed, so we can check." Westbourne Studios. And so there's exposed, blah blah blah. And he took me through the whole thing. That was how long has Westbourne Studios been there?
30 or 40 years.
Yeah, long time. So they knew then. So how we managed to miss all that, I have no idea, because that guidance has always existed So somehow that has been ignored.
But
So I don't, you know, I don't understand.
I'm gonna let the councillors ask their questions first, that's all right, and then come to the floor.
But the ordinance
Yeah, you ask questions. I'm gonna come back at the end to deal with it, but I'm gonna go on to councillors first. Done.
Thank you. Question really to Jason and Bashir. You always recognise you were going to have to share the space in terms of adult social care. So I'm trying to get my head around what was your expectation once they were stepping away, which was quite clear from the last meeting, as to who was going to step into the gap.
So when Latin City engaged that space, when Grenfell community engaged that space, it was a full building. And I think there's an acknowledgement that preceding Grenfell, there was a proposal for a full building use of adult social care. And that's why there's a co-design collaborative work that we do about social care. When adult social care, now that adult social care vacated that proposal, there's half of a building where a discussion needs to be had. We found out by the grapevine that there was preemptive plans to kind of shoehorn Canal Side House into that part, and I think that's now no longer kind of through the grapevine. It's something that is in the papers here, and it's something that Callum has discussed openly, but that hasn't always been the case. And so we make the point that of community footprint in North Kensington about the history of reduction of community footprint, and it's really important for us to acknowledge not only adult social care part of the community, and I mean that seems like an obvious point, but this is something that we care about as Maxilla, as residents, as locals, but so are Canal Side House. You know, this isn't it's not to say that Canal Side House tenants aren't suitable for Maxilla, but this is more about the inconvenience of a development which hasn't been approved by GLA being by default pushed into a community space which had its own criteria, its own remit. And when we talk about Latin City, that was the full use of a building for young people in the community. And so it's not our position to say, oh, this building is going to be run by, like, we can do the work to understand the community groups and the young people that could benefit from that space.
You should share the building.
Yeah, but this is it. It's not a building to be run by Maxilla City. Our role is to facilitate.
Not with you community.
Yeah. Okay.
But just to finish that point, I think where our position is that we need to do that work to understand who can best use that space. Like, we haven't got that current data, we haven't got an understanding of community stakeholders and groups, but because this has been, I'd say 90% of our time has been spent trying to understand what the council are doing on this project, as opposed to actually trying to progress the use of the space. And that's further compiled by the destruction of the space. If the space was still functional and open, we'd walk in tomorrow and we would very quickly establish how that space could be used. We could pilot things, we could do the work from within the building. At the moment, it's a closed building. It has been a closed council, and I think this is the time where things need to be done more transparently. And these things need to not be by default or preemptive. We're here, we can talk, these things can be discussed.
Thank you. Well, I'll just ask the second half of the question. Callum and Emma and Sarah, the comments that Tishan talked about the money and the previous fundraising, I'm still not clear about what wasn't.
So I think that refers back to a council tax letter that talked about the adult social care precept. Didn't actually say it was talking about spending the money on adult social care and community centre, community hub.
Okay.
And so is there any money?
Well, the adult social care precept is ring fenced and it's been spent.
But there's
as far as I know, I'm not responsible for this social care anymore.
Are there any?
This might help. I don't know. At the point at which I picked up this project, there was a budget. There was a stated budget, which
Yes, because it came to leadership
I
several
wanted to
times.
say, it was 6. You check
It was 4 something, then 6 something, and then 8 something.
You may
Last
remember
one was
better.
8.9.
So I think that's possible.
And that's separate to the adult.
That was the whole thing, when with the adult social care was still in.
And so if the adult social care is moved,
I've been asking that question.
is there anything left to work on?
Well,
Yes.
so as we know, the capital, all of this is capital expenditure. And all of this is money that we have to draw down into our capital from pipeline. It's money that we have to draw down from the pipeline into the programme. So in our pipeline of activity, we have an allocated budget for the adult social care and joint maxilla development. That figure had to be increased a number of times as the plans changed. And we got to a point then when we then taken the view to separate that in our pipeline, which isn't necessarily funded, and we haven't actually drawn it down into actual borrowed money. In our pipeline, we had a figure that what we've had to articulate, and it was a really difficult conversation, but we've had to articulate is, although delivering the Maxilla project on those bays is an absolute priority, and delivering for a new site for adult social care residents is an absolute priority. If we had to balance the two, we would meet the needs of our adult social care residents first. So what we've tried to articulate is that money that we had in the pipeline would first be spent on the adult social care development and then be spent on Maxilla. But there's two different equations to that. Is one, we don't know how much the adult social care cost is going to be. So it isn't true to say that there is no money left over. But also, it will be a process for the council through our normal budgetary setting processes to decide what we draw down capital to fund those programmes for. So it's as much a technicality about how we fund capital as anything else.
It's essentially a cake, and you're looking at having a slice.
And indeed more than that, how big the cake should be depending on how much we borrow. Yeah.
Before we get too into culinary metaphors, can we move on? Will, and then do you want to ask something?
Yes, I mean, I think Teshan to a certain degree answered my question, but I'll make it nonetheless because I wanted to make a point first. We just said we were looking at point 6 in the main paper. We also have your paper as political paper. And I just wanted to thank you for articulating your concerns. That's not to say that I understand or totally appreciate everything that's said in there because I haven't seen the background to this. Summary of your concerns, I think it's very clear. And one thing that comes out at the end of the context right at the beginning, one of the, after you talked about the need to accept his balanced apology, you've made the point about learning lessons and so on. You said that one of the main things that is in your priorities is followed by meaningful action. It's a slightly naive question. Do you think that, and to a certain degree, you said you haven't done the analysis yet, so I quite see it may not be able to answer this, but do you think that the proposed occupancy by Canalside House businesses or operations arguments working with you in the Maxilla with work practical terms, or do you think it's sufficiently that there's an opportunity there for that to work, that you could do the due diligence we've talked about? Because if it did work, I take the point about the process and the mistakes and the lessons of the lessons that need to be learned. But if you thought that would work, or after analysis you can see a way of it working, it would be a solution which would provide very short order, subject to budgets, for a service to the community. But one of the sadnesses of this, to my mind, is that there's been a lot of process, some of it good, some of it imperfect, but there isn't any outcomes for the community. Yeah. And I think that your well intention to get outcomes for the community, and I'm sure that Callum and his team are as well. And what I'm asking you is, do you see any possibility of that Canalside group and yourselves working in Maxilla? Because if you say no, then that's an absolute no. If you say I haven't done the work yet, that's maybe where you can. And if you say,
respond to that.
I mean, I would say that there's an assumption in that question that assumes that there aren't any alternative facilities for Canalside residents to operate.
I want to
clarify what I mean by
that. There are other options that you could think of, and you could assess, and you can articulate from your position.
I think it's really difficult to answer that in a very simple way because it sits within a very complex challenge that brings in a number of stakeholders, one of which including all of Canalside House tenants.
Yeah.
Talking about Ballymore, you're talking about Kids in the Green. There's this kind of moving kind of
That's the community.
And the wider community for sure.
We have a say on whether.
Yeah,
can I just stop this turning into overall chat. You'll have an opportunity later to ask questions. So I just want to answer.
The final thing I'd like to ask on that is, what do you see the wastewater?
I think the next step for Maxilla to take is to understand the stakeholders that could benefit or would be most aligned or appropriate to engage base 17 to 19. I think that's an unknown at the moment. And I think where we're at is that it was presented to us as a default position that Canal Side House, and as you'll see in the papers, that's the recommended position of the council, that Canal Side House are to move into Maxilla. And that sits within, like I said, a wider context when you're talking about Ballymore, when you're talking about that proposal. And so for us, it's a very sensitive conversation to have, where there's lots of stakeholders, not that just of Canal Side House, but also the wider community. And for us to then prioritise Canal Side House because the council say so, I think is a challenge. I think what we want to do next is have an open discussion about the use of space at base 17 to 19 in the context of the wider opportunities of different spaces in the community. So when we're talking about Kids on the Green, when we're talking about the space, when we're talking about all of these different community organisations who have seen a reduction in community footprint, I think this is the opportunity to have a wider asset conversation in the midst of Ballymore, this proposed Ballymore development. And I think this is the transparency that we're speaking to, is that we're given at most we're given the kind of at the end of the line, oh, Canal Side House is coming to Maxilla. Actually, we need to be sitting around tables where decision makers are discussing. I haven't had a conversation with Councillor Sarah Emma Will since all of these changes, and I would welcome them to reach out and actually sit down with Maxilla City directors to actually understand, because whilst Callum has come in quite recently, I'm sure you've been involved in some ways, but it's been an accelerated involvement recently. I think when we're talking about apologies has been offered by Callum, but I think there's a wider context and a wider discussion to be had around the history of this project and the partnership. And I think that's why there's still some hesitancy when you're talking about action and what's feasible. I think there's still some underpinning, there's still really weak foundations to this partnership that I think does need amending. There needs to be acknowledgements. And I think specifically, I want to really emphasize the point around the kind of bring in Joanna's point around that cake, that demolition that was done, that cost, which I'm not aware of. I don't know the number behind that decision. I don't know who made that decision, but there was that funding was found very quickly to demolish Maxilla's base 17 to 19, and so that's the kind of selective prioritization of what's being done and why is it being done. And now we've got dysfunctional buildings. So
thank you. Can I just move us on? I think what you've said just now underlines the need to have a very transparent and open looking at all. I mean, I can see that Callum is primed for it, but this is a very complex, lots of moving parts proposal, and that makes it even more important. And I think that will be our recommendation. That you take a very open. Callum, do you want to respond to that? Then I'm going to bring in Claire.
I absolutely agree with almost all of what Tayshan just said. The only thing, the point of clarity I would just like to bring is we have been meeting with the Canal Side House tenants both before and after the planning application, and we have shared with them, we've discussed with them what their ideal principles would be for a move. They've articulated that to us, and we have shared with them in a similar way that we've done with this list that we've gone through for our social care. We've shared with them a list of potential properties for them to think through. And it is not the fact that they are being shoehorned into Maxilla. It is the fact that of the options that are available and based on the principles that they were following, or now, it doesn't mean they might not want to move back in another time. That is their preferred position. And that's what we're working to. So in the new year, as you guys know, we're meeting with all of the Canal Side House tenants, with Maxilla CIC, to be able to think about what it would look like to have everyone in the room together. The other equation, and rightly, Maxilla CIC have repeatedly asked me what alternative uses, ever since the point that the councillor raised about since adult social care weren't on the table, what other opportunities are there? And we've talked about some of them in principle, but the reality is, with that planning application being approved, that is the council's biggest immediate need to be able to house tenants in a way that does outweigh some of our other priorities, which we do have many of. Well, if Christian or others were here from the property team, they would be able to tell you the long list of priority projects, but the size and scale is outweighed with Canal Side House moving the way it looks like it will.
Thank you, Claire. And then I've got a question.
Thank you. On page 24 at 6.8, it states very clearly, to facilitate development and much needed injection of new affordable and social housing, Canal Side House would need to be demolished. I received a briefing in my capacity as chair of the HCSC, along with my vice chair, which stated very clearly that it does not need to be demolished. It is not a requirement for that development to go ahead. So that is not correct in there. So if we didn't know better, the committee might be under a misapprehension. But that sentence is not correct. If I may just go on before we come to that. If it is the case that community space is going to be lost to Ballymore, it is incumbent upon Ballymore to re-provide that community space square foot on site. It is not for them to kind of commandeer some other bit of space, which will result in an overall reduction in our community space. That's not acceptable. So when we talk about moving Canal Side House occupants to Ballymore, it's great that you have been meeting with them. As of this summer, nobody had been meeting with them except for myself and some other councillors. And that was a problem, and they've been kept in the dark, and that building has been managed fine. And when I say square foot for square foot, it must include the empty areas in that building, which the council have kept empty as part of the managed decline for quite a long time. That whole building, which by the way is a heritage building, represents a piece of vandalism by this council allowing that to happen. And once it is gone, it is gone. It is irretrievable. I think it is hugely problematic and reflects extremely badly on our planning committee and the council as a whole, and the planning officers, in fact, that they are making these deals with Ballymore around North Kensington assets without a prior leave to the elected representatives and without a concern for actually the overall community space. It's completely unacceptable.
Would someone like to comment on that initial
Yeah, just to confirm, we both have Francis, Nico, Brian Labour's planning, haven't got a planning application that says that. So when you criticise the planning officers, that isn't the case. But if there's a variation,
advice has been given to the committee though, and that's what really troubles me.
If there's a variation that comes in from Ballymore, the planning committee will consider that. But as is, the outline planning application doesn't include that. So your criticism of planning officers needs to be withdrawn.
Thank you. So in that case, perhaps I need to correct that, and perhaps I'm talking about property in place officers rather than planning. Thank you for that.
Would anyone like to comment on that concern that is a misleading sentence?
My understanding
It's outright false.
My understanding is that sort of not a planning specialist or a property specialist is that the planning application does say Canal Side House will be demolished.
It doesn't. It's not necessary to demolish it in order to deliver the social housing. It's not necessary.
The planning application that has been approved
But
does say it will be
it may
demolished.
be included in it, but it's not
Take
necessary.
that away.
It's
Okay.
not necessary.
So if the
So
word,
this statement here, it says it would need to be demolished. It would not.
I
It
understand.
would not. If there was a will to save our heritage in the north of the
Okay,
borough,
fine.
it could be done.
So we should
Ballymore do
amend
not
that
want it.
sentence,
We should,
perhaps,
yes.
to say, or that paper should say, under the current planning application, and now planning.
apologies.
It wouldn't need to be, it just would be.
Exactly.
And so
I'm happy
one
to-
of two things is true. Either there's something potentially misleading to the committee in this report, or I and my vice chair have been told something untrue by Dan Hawthorne and David Allen, which I don't think is the
I'm
case.
very happy.
So
to
I think we need to be really clear when we're looking at scrutiny that officers are told the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, because it's so easy to mislead and to the public as well.
And I'm happy for us to clarify
I
that.
think this is about the words here.
Yes.
That's
That's fine.
It's
Right,
okay.
I'm now going to forego my question because I think we've sort of covered it, and I'm going to first move to councillors in the audience, and that's Emma, and then I'll move to other members to one last question.
Thank you. I've got some of my earlier points in a bit before, but as particularly about TfL, I do want that noted that has been the case for a very long time, and the Western Studios was built exactly as it should be. to allow them to inspect the underside of the Westway. So,
Emma's going to
how
help us on that.
how that managed to disappear into the ether, I don't know. But I just want to say something else as I was doing my walkabout. Was the security that we're clearly paying security to keep that base 17 to 19 safe. There's some kind of security there. But I was told that there are actually rough sleepers in there and they have to get them out. I mean, partly not that they have anything against rough sleepers particularly, but in case there's a fire which would that could risk the integrity of the Westway, they have to keep that now. And if we're paying for security for that building, we're failing there. So it's completely fine. But that was just a side issue, really. I wanted to say, because I've been trying to, since this paper came up, trying to get to grips with all the measurements of all of this. So what's the square footage of Canalside House? I can't find that anywhere. And what's the square footage of Maxilla City? And I couldn't find that either. You thought you might have it, but we couldn't find it. And space-wise, what would it mean to move that space in there, which is one issue. And the other issue, when we're talking about money, as far as I understand, unless I've missed something, which I may have, Canalside House hasn't been sold yet by the council. Is that correct? Hasn't been sold yet. So where is that money going? The money that we get for selling Canalside House should be used for its replacement, whatever, or back into the community, because that is a community asset, and it should that money, which should be considerable, would be going back into an asset of some kind. And I do think, and Toby has brought this up, that conflating the two issues is like it is, as Claire said, it's Ballymore's problem to replace that space for those tenants. And if that fits into everything, if that's fine, but it is their problem, and we shouldn't be taking on that problem.
It's not our job to
exactly conflating the two issues, which is what we do with the tenants and what we do with those bays, is unfair. And I do also think a value for money exercise, some kind of audit of this whole process, because we're talking about lessons learned, and no one's learning any lessons here. Nobody's learning any lessons, and it is the officers come and go. And you and I, Mary, know how that works. But where is the knowledge? Is there no continuum of knowledge? And I think we are really, really failing on our assets generally. So I want to know where that money is going to go when they sell Canalside House, if that's what must happen, and why that isn't going towards a very good cause of replacing space somewhere for tenants, or maybe
I think you also asked about square footage or
Square
meterage. So I
Yeah,
think that's some information.
Somebody will know. I just couldn't find it anywhere.
I think for
Chair,
transparency.
we're point of order on that. If we're going to talk about the square measurement, it needs to be clear as to whether it's gross or net. Because
Well,
can have
there could
I
be
will leave
30%
officers
difference.
to come back to us on that, and maybe that's something that is circulated. Emma's talked about the budget and where the money's going. I think that will probably be a discussion for future budget rounds. And
I can
So-
say something
Oh, go on.
about that, but
Excellent.
it's
Thank
not,
you.
it's early thinking and nothing has been decided. And we're very conscious of that, as you are, that the money should go back into community, into local assets. We have a couple, we obviously have work that needs to be done for St. Mark's if it moves wherever it moves. We also have Maxilla, and there's a third project which is quite important in terms of adult social care. So some of you know we bought Kingsbridge House from the NHS, and we want to improve that to make that a better half for both.
So the money for the community asset will go towards the adult social care asset.
It's a
They're moving it between business groups.
sorry, Kingsbridge House is a new asset that the council bought last 18 months ago. So we bought it from the NHS.
the respite currently.
It's a respite, which is with the NHS owned. It was in poor condition. We thought the right thing to do was to buy it and to put it into better condition and enhance the use. And that is our intention.
Okay.
It is possible, but not decided. I'm going to really be clear about that. And please minute that. Some of the money from Canalside House could go towards Kingsbridge House, and the very vulnerable
But they're two separate issues, completely separate issues. No, that's not
So
right. It's a community asset.
No way.
Yeah,
That's not the asset. That's not, you mean, sorry, that's the community.
I don't want to have an argument about this because it's slightly off the topic and we're just supplying information. This is all for future budget considerations. I'm quite keen to move on to other questions. So if I can start with the lady in the blue shirt and then move on to Sunny.
Yeah, and then Joanna Edward, local resident. Now, we were initially very much involved after the young people gave up Maxilla Training Centre, Maxilla City. Kim Taylor Smith, ourselves as local residents, very much involved, actually instigated that young people should be involved in it. The plan was eventually, I think, Kim Taylor Smith yourself decided social services would have half of it and the community will have half of it. I hear a lot of talk about stakeholders and all this. I'm a resident. I live right next door. I actually look over onto it. I know nothing about all these plans. This is the first I'm hearing about all this. What's happening to that centre now? Nobody's told us. That's the first question. The second one is it was to be a charity after it was a CIC, set up as a CIC, so everything could move quickly. We would all co-design the whole thing and all of this. What's happened to the charity that was going to set up? You know, these are the sort of questions we want. And also, what's going to happen to the building? Because really, we need that building. There's a shortage of buildings in the area for people to use. People are forever looking for community space. It's excellent as a community space. So what's going to happen to it now? Is social services gone now? Is it going to be for the whole of the community? And how are we, the residents who are directly going to be impacted with this, whatever happens in it, who's going to keep us informed and keep us involved? Having been involved initially before, we made sure that the young people would be on it. We need to be kept informed.
So really, kind of, that's a question.
And kept involved.
So we've got Maxilla CIC to represent the community, but what about I don't know, what is the CIC's role in wider consultation and indeed the council's role? How does all that fit together? And then I'm going to come to Sam.
Yeah, I mean, in my view, that it should be a joint endeavour. We obviously work with the CIC as representatives on behalf of the community, but absolutely that isn't to say that the council doesn't also have a responsibility to ensure local people who live in the area who have an interest are involved. So that's something we should take away and make sure that you are involved in some level.
I think one very unfortunate thing is that we've had nothing to consult on. We've been told there's no money for the project. We've been given no timeline. We've been given no assurances. And so throughout the last couple of years, every single time that we've wanted to go to consult, because I think one of the things you picked up on is we still want to have a charity once the building is operational. The idea is that this is not what I want. It's not what Zapi's want. It's not what Tayshan wants. We want to set up a charity that then openly goes out, gets trustees from across the community and then runs itself, and that you get other organizations coming into the space. And one of the reasons why we haven't set up that charity yet is we don't have a lease on the space. In order to properly fundraise, you need a minimum lease on the space. She's no longer involved in the project yet.
So you've clearly got someone here who'd like to be involved, which is great.
Well, I
She
was involved
I would like to be
but
in
we
the future.
decided that young people should take over. So I stepped aside, Emma stepped aside, we all stepped aside and left it with them. But we would like to know what's happening and we'd like to see it as a community
I
centre
think our
because we need it.
recommendation here might be a communications plan for the future. A joint communications plan, I don't know, but I mean, maybe that's something that when you next come back to us, we'd like to see covered.
For there to be a joint communication plan, I think there has to be a communication plan, an internal communication plan first. So.
Yeah.
But I've seen reports of where you've had community engagement sessions. So
Which are expired,
but that's what I'm saying, you have done things.
No, we have.
We just need to make sure now.
That was earlier on, like Bashir said, when things were going on, the past 3 years or the past 2.5 years, it's been a block and a block and a stoppage and a stoppage. And that's not from our side, that's from the council side. So yes, we would love to do consultation, but like Bashir said, what can we consult on when you guys don't even know what to do?
That's understood, but I think we've got to a stage now, maybe, when we would like to be, as a committee, we'd like to be assured there's going to be proper consultation, both on the part of the council and obviously involving that CIC. Joanna, did you want to add something?
Well, I was just thinking, surely since February, there was conversation we had with the rest of the community about if adult social care was moving out, who would you like to see take the other half? There was a conversation just to bring the subject back.
Not for the neighbours, what we can do.
Yes, with the neighbours, just to, to have that engagement.
A good point. Sammy.
Yeah, so Madam Chair, thank you. So tonight I'm not speaking as a resident, I'm speaking as the chair of Lobby House Tenancy Residents Association. I won't be too long, it's about 90 seconds. I was re-elected last week with 100% of the votes, which gives me a clear mandate to represent and secure the interests of Browning House residents, including the many young people who are part of our membership. So this evening, I'm duty bound to fulfill this role. And I just want to recognize that you guys have done fantastic work. And it's not you, but it's something that's in the report that's problematic for us as residents association. So I want to raise a concern about governance and community representation, grounded in both the wording of this report and established local authority guidance. So what the paper says is that Maxilla CIC will be the representative, will represent the community's interest, and the council will continue to collaborate with Maxilla CIC as a representative of the community. So now that's an issue, because the paper does not define any role for the community itself, as you said. It does not explain how residents are represented, how different voices are balanced, or how disagreements are resolved. In effect, this paper collapses the community into a single organization with no membership and no mandate from young people. But it's not personal.
No.
This creates a governance risk as well as financial and reputational for the council. Local authority guidance is clear that representation should be plural, inclusive, and accountable. Similarly, the LGSA is the same thing, that council should not rely on a single body as a proxy for the community, particularly where funding and influence are involved. So the risk is real. Many residents associations, as you know, are elected and include youth representation in their membership. By designating a paid council-funded CIC as the representative of the community, the council risks undermining us residents associations and members of the TCC. This will discourage people volunteering and sideline youth voices that have spent the last 2 years organizing themselves. This is particularly concerning in the Grenfell context. Young people who felt excluded for years have, over the past 2 years, come together and organized their voices. The paper removes them entirely from the governance picture, despite the existing representative structures that could include them. There is also a structural conflict of interest. An organization funded by the council with paid director cannot at the same time be treated as an independent representative of residents in discussions with the same council. Even where everyone acts in good faith, the roles are structurally incompatible. For Maxilla Hub to succeed, community representation must sit within the governance of this project, not be assigned to a single stakeholder. We therefore recommend that the papers are amended and that there's a recommendation and that there's a requirement that council of whoever comes back with a model of plural governance structure that will sit within the project delivery of this project, and with Maxilla being still the main stakeholders. But without that, it's problematic that you guys are also representative of the community. You're a CIC, and I think that paper lacks completely that governance model, and it will alienate these young people who don't have a voice.
So I think I'm picking up two strands there, if I may jump in, and those are concerns about conflicts and concerns about communication and involving community, which I think we've certainly picked up the latter point before. And I'm hoping that we will have another paper on Maxilla in future. And one of the things that we want from that paper will be a proper communication involvement plan for the future. And perhaps we should add in the issue of representation and interests into that.
But also, sorry to interrupt, recognizing that young people are in the membership of residents associations, and many of you councillors have residents associations in your wards. We have people who are service users of adult social care. We're completely excluded from that. So you've got a bit of a dichotomy here, where we're actually elected and representing views, but not around the table. So it's not about payments. It's about payment cannot go with independence. So you can't be a service provider or delivering on the project, but also be the community representative.
I think the point is well made, and we would ask for that to be picked up in the next iteration because I don't think this committee wants to lose sight of Maxilla. So in the next iteration of the paper, if we could have that included.
Just to respond to that really briefly, like as someone who is just about a young person still, I'd like to count myself.
I was going to ask that, right?
I'm still in my 20s.
That would be too rude.
I'm still in my 20s, and all the guys around the area could be bros.
You look so grown up.
I don't think any of us want to overstep that decision-making influence of the space. And also, I think it's important for us to establish that it's not by default that we are running the space. I think we've been in a position where it's been like nothing's happened as a result of the council's decisions and blockages and barriers. There are many different ways in which we can continue to engage young people, but also there's different stakeholders in terms of like the youth clubs, resident associations, and I think the next step for us is really mapping those organizations and those community groups and those young people for us to be able to hand this project to.
But I get that, Tricia, but someone guys.
I do want to have a very conversation
because
we've still got.
Yeah, it's not a conversation, just a matter that's crucial. The paper asks you to accept the recommendation that Maxilla CIC be the community representative, and that is. Yeah.
Is that
not
from?
right.
Is that
it's in the paper
from what they've said?
Yeah.
Okay,
So that's why I'm speaking.
But we
That's what you
don't
guys.
so,
But it's in the papers.
describe ourselves as representatives.
No, in the paper.
Somebody else wants to.
Okay, so I was just going to put a little bit of historical context, because I mean, whilst you presented that, what you said in relation to them is inaccurate. Basically, it wouldn't make any sense if you knew the history. There has been a long, ongoing process to get to the stage where Maxilla has. That's been going on since 2018. Myself and Joanna and various other people, I was contacted actually by the social council, someone trying to get hold of me because
I was on the MAC too.
Right, there we go. So you know the story exactly. So what you've just said, what you've just said, it doesn't really apply. And I think that the problem that you've got is that they have not ever labeled themselves a community representative. They are. The council didn't. No, but that's irrelevant. What the council write is what the council writes.
Yeah, but
I'm hang on pointing out they have never called themselves a community representative. They are a CIC that was established through a recruitment process
The chair.
and a consultation process. And that's how they got there. Just in the same way as your organisation.
Elected.
Right.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, but what I'm saying is they are.
I'll have a chat with
Yeah,
them.
but
About what I've meant.
No. I understand exactly what you're saying, but the point. Yeah, can I just finish my point? My point is that all organisations. It doesn't matter.
No. Carry on.
Organisations in Kensington and Chelsea or any other borough that receive funding through whether it's voluntary sector, whether it's through the health that comes from the council, if you're making the point that you receive funding as an organisation, therefore that excludes you from having a role to represent your community, that would be problematic because all the voluntary sector receive funding. So I'm just saying kind of what you've written,
Not all of us, we don't.
well, the prosecution doesn't
Thank
allow.
you. Okay.
Okay, maybe not all, but the majority who apply is.
I'm going to allow you a very short point.
Oh, sorry, no, there's one more point that hasn't been raised about, you've spoken about the ownership of that land of Maxilla base 16 to 17 or 17 to 19. That one of the things that's kind of an elephant in the room that's not come up is that the land that's currently owned by RBKC, leased through TFL or whatever it may be, that's part of the 23 acres. That is supposed to belong to the North Kensington community. And RBKC should not be holding a lease for that. They should be giving that back to the community. And one of the considerations in all of this is, why is RBKC still holding on to a lease for section of the 23 acres that was supposed to be given to the community in 1970? And that is a very important point.
Well, I will leave possibly to answer that anon. Claire.
Very, very quickly, thank you, Chair. On the subject of representation, it still continues to be the case that officers don't quite realise that residents have representatives. They've elected them. They're called ward councillors. So, I mean, I don't know why I still keep having to hammer that point home. But the point that Sonia's made is actually a really important one, because it's the inclusion of that stipulation in the council report that Maxilla CIC is a designated representative of the community, which actually triggers the best value requirement.
Yes.
So on that point, I think we need to really come back, because given the long history, I know that Councillor Pascal was very shocked at the last time this came to the committee to realise how much Maxilla had cost the council so far, because it's huge. And it's cost them more to demolish what was inside. Tayshan mentioned that. We still don't have an answer about who decided that or why. So I think there is a serious piece of best value, because as a committee, we're talking about public funds.
you. I had asked,
And within that, we need to make sure,
it was a short.
within that, we need to make sure that any learning from the appalling journey from 2016 to now, which I think is really shameful to the council, and I will circulate it for anyone that doesn't know the whole thing, the learning from that really does, for the sake of public money and best value, really does need to be captured going forwards, which is what we all want to do.
Thank you. So then Callum's going to come back to you about that choice.
I will ask advice from the monitoring officer, Claire, for that.
Yes, it would go through
Yes,
the
I'll do it.
monitoring
Yes.
So I think we made a couple of recommendations on the adult, so you can side the paper, and I think our recommendations on this side of the paper relate to consultation and having a proper consultation plan, which involves residents and residents associations, the CIC and the council. So that's our recommendation on that. Thank you very much to everybody who's given up their time to come here today. And I think we need to move on. We've got other papers tonight, so we need to move on. Thank you very much for coming. And your paper as well. So I'm going to call Stuart forward because we're going to talk about the prioritised community safety plan.
I don't know. I'm saying I've been away for too long. You forgot my name.
I do.
Questions.
And also I get very tense at the meeting. I'm trying to
Fine, you got it. I don't, yeah, but I've got an answer.
Right.
Okay, not.
And let's move on to paper A7. Stuart and Sarah, can we have a little bit of quiet, please, in the room? Moving on to paper A7. Good, Sarah. I've introduced.
I want to know why the council.
Would you like to introduce?
What I was just going to say, Mary, I know that the committee is a very good committee and that they've always read papers.
They never read this.
I don't have anything to add, but Stuart may want to add.
No, I'm aware of time's not on our side this evening, so I'm very happy to go to the question.
Good. Donna.
Seriously, this is crime. That you were on me, and I'd like to know more, like the problem, thank you, want a little bit more clarity on what is the definition and who's setting the parameters and the boundaries, and where's the police?
Yeah, it's a police definition, and it includes burglary, theft, robbery, vehicle crime, where people steal things, they acquire things that they can then go and sell on the black market or use themselves or what have you. It covers those type of crime areas, which, as the committee will see, we haven't previously included that because the committee needs to balance a number of things in agreeing what the priorities are. And one of the things it needs to kind of agree is, can it collectively make a difference? And we are increasingly in a space where as a partnership we can make a difference to those type of crimes because of networks that we now have with businesses. Now that we have the business improvement districts and we have those arrangements and those partnerships, we're much better able to collectively impact on those types of crimes.
Do you see shoplifting or the serious spending, the serious gambling, shoplifting falling into this category?
Yes. Yeah. So the shoplifting. So shoplifting in London last year went up by 52%. It went up in our borough by 50%. So shoplifting went high. And behind that are lots of different things, but there's also organised criminal networks behind that. We're involved in other types of crime, criminal behaviours as well.
I mean, that's the stuff that's reported. I mean, when they're not even engaged, lots of it just isn't because it's not worth the paperwork.
Yeah, so police are always asking people to report. They want to drive up reporting. You are right, because when we look at crime statistics, there are some crimes that really underreported. Shoplifting is one that some businesses don't report because they just what's so nothing happened last time they reported. They're too busy getting whatever they're getting, so they don't report. As has been discussed in this committee before, the more reporting, the more hotspots we can get, and the more resources we can ask.
So as councillors, we should be encouraging our residents and businesses to report. Sydney, were you next?
Thank you, Chair. Just two quick questions and following up on the business side. In the discussions that I've been having at the local Chamber of Commerce over the last few months, there's sort of an unwritten rule that it's less than £200 on shoplifting, the police won't turn up. And even if you look at the 24-hour Tesco's in Redcliffe Ward, which is opposite Chelsea Westminster Hospital, you often see the security guard running after somebody down the road who's come in, nicked something and run away. To what extent can you feed back to your contacts at the Met Police that it appears that outside of the bids, there just isn't enough enforcement of crimes that happen on a very regular basis in and around the borough, and what's going to be done to actually tackle those?
So we do discuss that with the police. There's a number of ways that are kind of structured in which those conversations happen. There's a statutory community safety partnership which Sarah chairs, which includes a range of different partners, and we will look at those type of a range of different crime offences and what the police are doing about it. So that's one of the kind of more structural ways in which we as partners can hold the police to account. There's also the ward panels, and there's also the Safer Neighbourhood Board, which are all resident-led and chaired. And I know that residents who are actively involved in their community around the community safety agenda are also linked in and have concerns about shoplifting and crime. So I know that those residents that are in the wards which cover Portobello Road, for instance, or Nottingham Gate, or Kings Road, are having conversations with the police, and are trying to hold the police to account to be more proactive around shoplifting. And I think the police do understand that shoplifting is indicative of other more serious criminal offences. So yeah, there are multiple ways.
You can have a supplementary, but I'm going to encourage all councillors and officers to be very concise, because we're at 8:20 and we've got some very important budget posts to discuss as well as this very important thing.
Thank you, Chair. Just two very brief points. The first one is the Metropolitan Police has an app where they want to get data for when crimes have been committed. To what extent is the council promoting and what are we doing to get residents to use the Metropolitan Police app? And then the second part of my follow-on question, so I'll be brief, is in relation to things at the last resident meeting that I had at Colnham Court, there were planning applications for 24-hour casinos to come into parts of the borough, and of course a lot of residents are very concerned about follow-on crime that comes with late night industries that come into the borough. To what extent does the community safety team follow back into the planning process to try and make sure that either there's enforcement when planning is granted or planning is rejected on safety ground? Two questions.
Well, so in the first one, in regards to the app, the Met app, we've been proactive through our comms and through our partnerships in trying to promote that. So that's something that we will continue to try and support the Met to get as much saturation across the whole as possible. On the licensing issues, we are within community safety services and the council. We are linked in and work really closely with our licensing colleagues. Where there are licensing issues, our licensing colleagues attend our weekly tasking or problem solving meetings. We are less so, I think, involved in those planning decisions. Our police colleagues are take the lead in those places and spaces and processes.
Thank you. Can I just remind colleagues that we're sticking to lovely ladies to have Stuart here to ask him lots of questions. We should concentrate our questions on this paper. Will, you're next, and then Flan. Oh, sorry, and then Greg, and then Flan.
How can we actually get as Robert Peel said, every citizen is a policeman for some people get paid for it.
I'm not sure that's quite the subject of the paper. but-
It's very much to do with paper because this paper,
The paper is about the consultation and
the
engagement.
paper is about process. What I'm asking is how can we actually
I can't
go
stop.
past process into practical operations?
2 sentence response to it.
Engaging with the community and providing them information so that they're better able to protect themselves and their neighbours.
1 sentence, excellent, thank you.
And then nothing in terms of enabling ring bells to work with CCTV cameras to provide the evidence. We have case studies of how it works. There's the Kensington, Old Church Street
Yeah.
thing. It gives a practical example of how it does work. Big data, pre-qualified police could achieve a lot.
But
Is this being
Well, with
investigated?
Let's Engage, you can upload your CCTV directly, which is a
So
really
that's-
big step.
Can I do
It's
one
not
to
the
Greg,
same thing.
please?
Observations, just number one issue on the doors and my walls, crime in all its forms. The things that come up are shoplifting, so it's not just Portobello Road, the public have noticed. Theft from motor vehicles, fear of robbery, it's an actual real problem outside Knightsbridge, but it's there. Not on your paper, antisocial or highway code violations doesn't appear here at all, but it's a really big issue on the doors. So antisocial cycling on the pavements, busting red lights. I would add to the chair's benefit, I have seen some car drivers busting red lights in the last few weeks as well. So so it's spreading, but not enforcing the highway code. Big issue for residents, and I'd like you to take that away, please. And I don't need an answer because it's not really a question. But you can come back to me.
I'll make an observation, and that is that it is the police's responsibility to enforce the highway laws. We will hold them to account for doing so. That is, whilst that's not a priority in the plan, that doesn't even say we will not continue to lobby for the police to prioritise them.
And forgive me, I wasn't trying to imply that you're responsible for law enforcement. I'm saying what's coming up on the doors and that we need to the law enforcement because you're not law enforcement, it's the police and criminal justice system primarily. That's what they need to do.
Thank you very much. To go on to the strategy itself, what we have here, I'm looking at page, I think it's 3, 5.4, no, 5.5. So you talked about the consultation with the residents and stakeholders and what have you, and we have over 70 views captured to inform this strategy. The rest of the paper then goes on to list, as Greg has referred to, 5.6, what the issues coming out of that were. That does align with what I hear from residents in my own constituency. But what I'm wondering is, the consultation tells us what residents are perceiving. How does that match with what police are reporting in terms of incidents? Is there a mismatch or is it roughly aligned?
There is a synergy. The highest level of crime in the borough is theft. That goes back to the serious acquisitive crime. The next highest crime level is violence. That includes all types of violence. So there are synergies to what the crime profile is, what residents think is really important, and what the partnership board are putting in the plan.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, Toby?
Thank you, question.
Please remember my injunction for conciseness.
I'll be as concise as I can while getting the point across. So to pick up again on 5.5, well, generally speaks about the difficulties that we have. Is there a way we can hear back about what the criteria are for selecting consultees, including partner agencies, but when talking specifically about community representation and how representative they are or aren't, what evidence we have that they, have a mandate to represent the community, etc., etc. Does that make sense?
What, the organisations under?
Well, that's part of it, but I mean, just generally, any community feedback we're getting that we use. My experience is it's not always necessarily very representative.
Yeah.
This is an organisation, you know, how do we choose who our consultants are? And how do we know that, you know, just because I think all the vagaries of local government, some people do, but partly have a louder voice rather than a greater sort of
And actually, the citizens panel is a very useful group of people because they're throughout the borough. They're a very diverse group of people that I think it's young people through to, you know, whatever. And so we do a survey with them every year. So that's really helpful to get comparisons each year.
Okay, well, I follow up, and just obviously, I do want to ask something that is not, I think, ever going to really come up in this kind of engagement is police scrutiny, like scrutinising the police, because there is, I think, probably the most underreported type of crime is crimes committed by police. I look at women and girls, and I think about violence against women and girls, how that's been you know, that a huge focus on that nationally has been on this. So I was wondering if there's any mechanisms in this sort of consultation. My concern is that we are necessarily, you know, this is our
Again, Toby, that's slightly outside the remit of this paper, but
Just
one sentence answer, and then I'd like to.
The Safer Neighbourhood Board is a resident-led board which holds the police to account. It's one of its core purposes.
Thank you.
The Safer Neighbourhood Board.
Yeah.
I'm going to draw this discussion to a close because we've got to move on to the budget papers, and it is 8:30. So thank you very much, everyone who's attended for this. And can I ask Jen and Mike and everybody else, Maxine and Stuart, everybody. Okay, do you want to comment on the second one, or is it too early to crunch the number before you start?
No, I'm happy to comment. You'll all have seen the headlines in the Times, the Evening Standard, BBC News, that the Labour government, well, the Labour government have chosen 6 councils where they're lifting the cap on council tax on the referendum. That means they're giving we are one of those. They are giving free range to councils to punish their residents through above inflation rises in taxation, and they have not improved our financial situation after all of our lobbying and all of the efforts that we've made on behalf of our residents. I'm incredibly annoyed by the situation. They are choosing to punish central London, and they're now allowing an unlimited amount of punishment for the residents across the state. I'm afraid that's all I have. We'll have much more accurate numbers recently.
Something there, Jeff.
Don't think so.
Can I just?
Well,
can we get on with the questions?
The 82. He's talking about the 82 million. That's quite material.
That's also why council tax is having to go up, because the Labour government are cutting our budget by at least 82 million.
Are they?
Yeah.
They're not.
Well, I don't want to argue about it. That's Jeff's reception thing. We can argue about that. So what I want to do, what we're talking about now is the budget proposals. In the context of nothing having moved very much. Do you want to do a quick introduction, Jeff? Right.
I think I'll let Mike be the cool head to my angry mind.
Mike, you're feeling cool and oh well, this cool head. It's not actually cool.
We're doing our budget proposals.
Yes, we are.
For
we're doing agenda item 5. Agenda item 5.
For resources, obviously, rather than the overall budget proposal, which was that related.
Well, it's just exactly well.
And to the next that we're A5. Sorry, I wasn't particularly going to say that the main issues is the growth and savings that are proposed for the resources department and for the chief defence department, and happy to answer questions on those. What isn't included here in terms of the savings that the department is making are find them, are the savings from within the VR program, which are going to impact quite quite a lot in the resources department. So we've accepted 39 voluntary redundancies within resources, which will save an additional £1.9 million, 1.7 million from the general fund, and that will be the main driver of savings within the department, actually absorbing those and continuing to provide services, or aiming to continue to provide services at the same level after those redundancies have taken place. So that's in addition to the actual savings that are listed in the appendix here. And the savings, obviously, you've also got the savings for 25, 26 and for 27.
So I think this is a theme, and if I might be allowed to ask the first question for once, I think this is a theme that has run through all the business groups, and that is these cost-cutting savings and not knowing now. So we've got a whole load of every business group has had some sort of redundancies or rationalisation of workforce as part of their savings, and yet there's this off-staged 4.5 million. And it's very, very hard to assess the safety of the arrangements and the efficacy of them when we don't know what that 4.5 million is made of and what effect it's going to have. You know, you've made a few adjustments here and there, and then you've got another 1.9 million of redundancies. How can we be certain that the services are going to be maintained, and why? You know, the timing of it is such that we cannot scrutinise it properly, and I think that's a real problem for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't actually know if there is a way that could be done, because obviously those redundancies have been driven by the people who put in for voluntary redundancies, and then whether we've accepted them or not. We have accepted them, obviously, on the basis that we believe we can find ways to continue to provide services at the same level by changing our arrangements on the basis of those acceptances. So I think it was 62 applications were made within resources and other group. That was the largest. But the ones that we've turned down are the ones where we haven't believed it will be possible to continue to compensate for those in effect.
Just to take a little bit of frustration, a little bit further from my side, I'm incredibly frustrated because I understand there's an element of confidentiality. Of course there should be. This is about people's jobs. But I don't know who's leaving the town hall. So I don't know which services are being impacted. And so it's very hard to be sort of assured that actually the right people have left the building, or that have left for the right reasons, and that we've retained those which are fulfilling a role that we believe is necessary for our residents to continue to benefit from. So I understand this is self-selecting insofar as that people put their name forward, and of course you can't just accept everybody from one department all at once without sort of catastrophic changes. And I do trust the officers to make sure that they've chosen correctly. My issue with it is that I simply don't know who and how that.
So I think maybe there'll be a recommendation arising from this, that it's, we need to review this as a process and whether this is the right way to go ahead ever again in terms of allowing enough scrutiny, both by the lead member and the scrutiny committee of the proposals arising out of it. Because I mean, the problem with, as you say, voluntary redundancies is self-selecting, and we can't be certain that it's not all going to be concentrated. I know you wouldn't let them all go, but that the majority of them would be concentrated in an area that you don't want to weaken. So I think that might be a recommendation.
Yeah, and I think that's fair enough. And I don't. I think it was a process that was useful for this year and enabled us to reduce staff costs without compulsory redundancies, which is a much more difficult process because of the challenges that we do face, because the settlement, as James said, as Councillor said, is worse than we expected, and we were expecting it to be We were expecting it to be bad, but it is worse than we expected. Then because of that, we can't say we won't have to. Well, we will have to reduce in future years as well beyond this. But I don't think a VR process would necessarily be the right way to do that. Again, it's usually something you can only do once anyway, I think. But we have
I
to.
understand it's organisationally less painful, but I think a review of this process and where it's left us in 6 months' time might be very useful for future discussions. And now I'll stop, shut up myself, and I'll go to Joanna and then Preeti.
Thank you. Really, it's been a big cyber attack, and so I would like to understand what is the impact of that on our current budget, and also on our plans ahead, given that it will take a while to get back up, and indeed query to what extent some of the savings that have been put forward will actually move from being green or being achievable by virtue of the fact that we're going back to try and get our services back to normal as opposed to transgressing. So first of all, what's the current impact and what's the expected impact in this financial year? And then what are we looking at the next financial year?
I'll let Mike answer the numbers side of it. I'll simply say personally that the hats off to all the council officers that are working to resolve this.
Great.
If you're the average person on the street, I would think you'd probably haven't even noticed, other than the letter was put through your door, because the bins are still being collected, the roads still look fantastic, and all of our sort of statutory services are still ongoing. There has, of course, been noticeable impacts for people that are in the middle of processes, applications, that sort of things, and I am sorry for them. All sorts of things across the piece, but we were able to even have planning committees last night and approve over 1,000 homes. Mike, on the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't got numbers yet. We're putting together numbers. There are already obviously some direct costs that are coming from it. We are having to get in a lot more IT specialists to deal with this, and there will be direct costs from that. There will then be a recovery program which will go on for months, which will be about improving our infrastructure. Now that is going to include costs that we were already, some costs that we were already anticipating, like upgrading systems and moving to much more modern based systems. And we can't, but it will cost a considerable amount of money. It may, it should, in the long term, generate some savings as well, because modern systems will lead to improvements in productivity. So that'll be the aim of that. But there will be a considerable cost for recovery, which we will have to report to council as part of this budget process, but we haven't yet put numbers down for that. There will be also some indirect costs. We're not able to collect income at the moment for business rates or council tax. The systems are being put together, workarounds are being put in to enable us to do that. But obviously it will make it harder to collect that income because we're collecting it late. So we've already missed one direct debit run in December, and that money is still due to the council. But obviously the fact that we haven't collected it means that there will be indirect costs from that, and there will be indirect costs also from other workarounds that we're having to do. And I think it is true to say that some of the savings may also be over in this department, and in other departments may also be affected by the cyber incident, unfortunately. So it isn't good news. There's no point me. There are a lot of costs that are going to result from it.
We need to be looking at other savings.
If the updated settlement is anything to go by, we need to be looking at plenty more.
And where does that come back to?
Presumably in January.
Yeah, we'll an update
in our next meeting.
The budget papers are on the agenda for next meeting.
Yes,
so we
so
are.
Yeah, so we can.
Next, and then
Well, shall I, while you're looking, shall I ask Will and then Sydney can come back?
Yes, I was going to ask if we could have a separate, simple paper to explain uncontrollable costs in a clearer way, and not just in the context of this business group, this department, but across the council. Because sometimes the uncontrollable costs appear to be clear in the context of a particular department, then they're not clear across the council. Allied with that, and I don't think it's exactly the same thing at all, it's that there are overhead costs and how they're allocated. For instance, space costs. I remember when I was working on the space program here. What?
We're talking about recharges, are we?
Yes. Recharges put on top of the officer's salary to a department. How they're made up. Because when I did the space program with officers, there were all sorts of imperfections there that were going to be looked at in the future. And it give us a flat rate allocation per officer. Whereas, for space use, whereas if they're only going to do part of the day or part of the week, they should have the same space use as somebody who's in full time. And that was proposed to be the next stage on the space program, which was 10 years ago now. But I'm just wondering whether there's been any further progress on that front.
So,
I mean, I'm not
obviously
asking
there are recharges.
I'm asking for some clarity. If you could, rather than a verbal answer now, if you could just have synopsis circulated to committee. Say this is how we do these things, and this is how what I control the costs are, what is included, what isn't included, things are recharged under the recharge.
I think yes, no objection to doing so, but until we have Oracle fully up and running, it'll be difficult.
Well, that's fair enough. I mean, you can say it's impractical at the moment. Yeah. We could do it.
But
do it
in
3 months'
future,
time or 6 months' time. Yeah.
We are going to, will take some time because of that, I think that's correct,
but Jackie will
yes,
make a
we
note of
can,
it, we'll put it on our tracker.
but in terms of,
we're realistic.
can I just say that in terms of looking at the, obviously we do recharges for various accounting reasons because we have to. I think often it's more useful looking at what those costs are rather than how they're recharged, because they're recharged for various accounting reasons. The key thing is how much do our buildings cost, really, what the quantum is, rather than
I'd like to be sure that where there's a recharge of income seen in one place, maybe central, but actually there is a payment made the other end. It's that sort of thing I mentioned. So there are bound to be central rules that describe this. It'd be interesting to, and I've just seen the central guide. It's like this.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
A plain man's guide of how the central rules work.
Sydney.
Thank you, Chair. On page 46, I had a quick question. I'll keep it brief. Appendix 2, budget pressures, growth proposals. There's a line item, the second one down, saying cyber security, and the second one is cybersecurity zero trust architect. My question is really on the process that we went through when we put in Oracle. My reading is that we are moving from what says here's a traditional network security model to a less vulnerable zero trust one. Was that as a result of the cyber attack? Was that something that we'd already planned? And if that was the case, could somebody just explain some of these numbers? What we're looks as if minus 50, 27, 28, and then no additional costs. I'm not entirely clear saying that.
So I can pick this up. So this is a growth item that went in the previous round of budget proposal. So this is not new and not due to the cyber incident that has happened more recently. The figure of the minus 50k just reflects that there are some one-off costs associated with procuring this contract to enable the council to move on to this zero trust architecture. So what we're showing here is basically they need the 50k just to set the contract up, and then it drops out. And then it drops out. Exactly that.
And so therefore, how will those costs change in the light of the fact that we're undergoing any cybersecurity?
I think these now are effectively out of date because we're having to do all of this and much more as a result of the cyber attack. So in effect, these growth items are covered by what I said about the additional cost of the recovery program. So we probably need to update. Sorry,
this can just be ignored then.
well, it's not being ignored. We basically still have to do it, but it will be part of the recovery program to move to this model anyway.
Great, and then I'll come back to Tracy.
Thank you. So paragraph 4.11.
Sorry, David. My question was the move from a network security model to a less vulnerable zero trust model done as part of the Oracle work, or is it just something that's happened here? I'm just trying to understand when that decision was made.
But my understanding is it was proved to me a while back was that we have ongoing cybersecurity upgrades that come along. This was one of those sort of, I don't want to say routine, but certainly a standard approach to improve our security. I don't personally believe it was connected to Oracle, although I don't know, it shakes there. And it was just simply one of those good housekeeping elements that we put forward to increase our spend on cybersecurity. And Mike is right, we're going to have to sort of look at it all new.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Chair. So you were asking for comments on paragraph 4.11 about public health savings proposal, and at the time we've got such a difficult problem in front of us. We do have to concentrate on universal services and statutory services, and so 100 needs must 100% support. For me, I think we do absolutely have to make maximum best use of the public health budget towards the priorities of the council, and those priorities have got to be laser focused. My question is a much smaller one. It's on paragraph 3.19, where there appears to be a logic problem. In the context of this quite small community safety and resilience, 178k overspend. And then the paragraph doesn't explain what the according to me doesn't explain what the overspend is about. It then talks about we're trialing the remotely operated floating camera, which I'm sure is marvellous. But it doesn't correlate with the headline. So what's going on there? Why have we overspent by 178k on community safety and resilience?
So we believe that figure is not quite accurate. And the figure is 49,000 overspent. It's a huge difference. And the 49,000 overspent comes from 23,000, which is a structural budget pressure on the CCTV fibre contract, and a £20,000 budget pressure on the staffing restructure, which we will be addressing.
So why does the paper reflect a 178k overspend when obviously you're the team leader in the details here?
I think that may be an error. It's why it's been revised this afternoon.
Yeah.
Is there an error in our paper?
So well picked up, councillors.
You'll note on page 46, we're putting in 23,000 for the CCTV charge.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask Mr. Priestley whilst he's at the table? Mr. Priestley, you only put in for prevent for 1 year, 150,000. Is there a reason why it's not being
1 year? It's continuous.
I think it's
not a recurring thing?
It's recurring.
So it's.
It does have that. It does, because once you raise the budget by 155,
So
then
it's
don't use it
right,
anymore.
excuse me.
Then the next project. So Pretty was next, and then Clive.
A clarification on page 37, 3.16. There's an overspend of 150,000 financial management. Is this a one-off, or I just need a clarification on that?
Yes, it's a one-off. It's due to having to use agency staff, particularly I think the implementation of Oracle. So I think some of it drives with that.
Right.
So it will come out, yeah. Hasn't come out.
Okay. Of course, all these figures will change because of the cybersecurity, and we don't have any insurance. One thing the recovery program, do we have any timeline? And I'm assuming, are you going to be supported mainly by external providers, or do we have any internal capacity to mitigate to reduce the cost of the recovery program? Do we have enough trained staff?
No, we don't.
Okay.
We have
So it's all
staff,
external.
even so in the response and the containment, we've already been using staff from external staff. For the recovery program, we will need to as well, and that's essentially the additional cost.
We don't just want to recover. We want a digital leapfrog over everybody else. We want to come out of this with the best digital services in London. We want to use that as a way to transform our services going forward. We've already talked about how AI is going to change anything. If there's any silver lining in what's happened to this organization, this ought to be it, that we now seize the opportunity to fully look at every single system we use and whether there is something better that's out there, or whether we need to design it ourselves or bring in partners from outside to do it. There is, of course, the day-to-day recovery, which Maxi and I saw come to the table, can perhaps answer on. But from my side of it, there is a cost, but this is really the opportunity that we have really needed, a bit of a kick up the bum, really, to make sure that we come out of this with just absolutely world-class services for residents. Everything should be on your phone. There's absolutely no reason why you should not be able to carry out most of the functions of a local authority on your mobile device, like every single other digital service that's out.
One more question?
Yeah. On the VR, is there any potential that we might have to replace, some of the redundancies by agency staff, or do you feel very confident that because as Councillor Kamali said,
Yeah,
they were involved?
Sorry, if I might answer that question, just because it's broader than resources, although as Mike said earlier, resources is the area that's had most applications for voluntary redundancy. So just going back perhaps on some of the earlier comments that were made, which I completely understand, I do want to also say to the committee, we have been to the admin committee twice with this, as it is a matter for the admin committee, obviously also a matter for the scrutiny as well, but it might be worth us just circulating the reports that have been to the admin committee. It does give you more detail than are in these main budget reports. We've just over 100 members of staff, I think it's 109, have accepted voluntary redundancy offers of an overall workforce of 2,615. So it is still a relatively small proportion of staff, and part of the criteria that we set and that we agreed with the leadership team was that anything that actually entailed a reduction or significant change in service was something that should be included within the budget as a full consultation. And so you see that in some of the proposals under discussion tonight, and also, for example, some of the ones in children's services, where it actually entailed a redesign of the service. So therefore, it wasn't just included in a big sort of sum of VL savings. It was separated out and listed out as a specific item, even though some of those staff will actually be exiting through VR. So the short answer to your question, Pretty, is no. That should, the idea is we let these people go, and we do not have to replace them. We have to reduce our staff cost base as part of that, as part of the savings.
And Chair, one final, very briefly, this might not be just following on from Councillor Kamali's thing that he wasn't aware of, who's been let go. May I just ask why that process, what was the premise behind that decision?
Yeah, so when people applied, that's why we set the criteria quite carefully, and we have had panels that worked to specific criteria, all of which I could share. Up until a member of staff accepted their voluntary redundancy, all best practice and advice is that you need to treat that as a confidential matter. But people have, that deadline has now passed. We shouldn't, not that I don't bring a list to a public meeting, but we shouldn't be able to share those lists with league members now. That's very recent, just at the beginning of this month.
Sorry to interrupt, Maxine, but that's post fait accompli, right?
Right. But based on the criteria that was set, that those redundancies could be accepted without a significant change to without the kind of change to a service level that would need consultation.
But the criteria was not defined in collaboration with councillors. It was
It
brought
was,
down.
it was defined in collaboration with the leadership.
Thank you. Claire?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm looking at these saving proposals in Appendix 3. I'm looking on page 48. And what I'm trying to understand, getting feedback and comments from, for instance, budget working group, budget scrutiny working group. All things being equal, what's in this table will go ahead unless there's some intervention. Understood. So that being the case, when I turn to appendix, well, we can look at appendix 4, but when I'm looking at the equalities impact analyses, there are some there where there are negatives. And I'm wondering what assurance can we have that any of those negative equalities impacts will be fully mitigated?
Is that to the head of the state service?
So, for example, I mean, there's one on page 58, looking at the honorarium, resources and customer delivery, race negative, religion negative, sex negative. And yet it says no further action required. So I'm a bit confused that these budget proposals may entail negative equalities impacts upon our residents.
Well, I think that one's on the staff, but anyway.
Yeah, so that was
That's all residents.
yeah, so that one is starting salaries within. So our duties under equalities impact assessments are to do the assessment and then to take mitigating action if there are negative impacts, or to review the decision, or there's a whole menu of options there. What we're trying to do here is be transparent about where there can be negative implications. On that one specifically, I mean, I can leave my comment because it's specifically in resources, but essentially what we're proposing, one of our staff savings is it isn't just about the redundancy programme. There is also staff savings saying, instead of advertising bands when we advertise roles, say 40,000 to 50,000, we say starting salary 40,000. The expectation is that you come in to work here, you start £40,000. Now, obviously, there might be some circumstances under which, if it's a particularly competitive market, for example, IT engineers, or indeed something else, then you would have then people might try to negotiate a higher salary, and there might be reasonable justification for that to happen. Now, what the evidence tells us, not just here but in other places as well, is that often people with protected characteristics are less likely to negotiate high salaries. So if you, so in that instance, you have to be careful and monitor carefully and make sure that you've got some positive work that means that you don't expand gender or ethnicity pay gaps, which are something that we are required to report on and have made a number of commitments around. So that just explains sort of what it would mean in relation to that one in particular. In relation to all of them, the budget consultation, the equalities impact assessment are all part of the review that the decisions that leadership team makes, and the scrutiny review that goes on here, and the decision at full council.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, or may I ask a few questions? I wanted to ask questions about the growth. So there's the prevent service. So we've had the funding removed from this. So we've got to substitute the funding with Council of Fulham. When we're suddenly expanding our budget this week, are we actually asking if we're getting value for money? And is this something that we feel, are we convinced that it's effective and worth the money, given that we're not actually having to pay for it ourselves? That was my question on that. And I was also going to ask about the Oracle licensing and cloud service. Surely that replaces some Hampshire costs, doesn't it? Why are we, and didn't we budget for it when we were planning to implement Oracle? Why is it suddenly appearing now as a cost, as quite a significant cost?
I'll let Mike answer that one. I don't know the the answer to that one. But yes, I would hope that we are making sure that we are getting value for money out of it.
And it's just one of the things that we need to, you know,
Yeah.
examine. Mike, sorry, on the Oracle licensing.
Yeah, it does. There are savings. Obviously, there's considerable savings on the Hampshire IBC service, but this is the net impact. And that's why it's in there as growth.
But why is it a great fund? Why didn't we know about it before? This is what I'm asking.
So in the previous year, it was funded from project costs, and it now needs to be put into the budget. So we didn't know about it, but we funded it from the project cost basically in the first year of the Oracle program.
But it should still have been in the kind of 4-year budget, presumably.
I would agree.
Yeah. But you'll look at it. Okay.
Yeah. No, I agree with you.
And then I suppose, sorry if I'm like one extra question, savings and transformation thing. It's been here forever at 200 grand, which I'm assuming is mostly personnel costs. Are we convinced that it's going to be a permanent thing, or is it part of a, say, 3-year process? Maxine?
Yeah, if I can answer that one, because that sits directly under me. So this is, and I think we discussed it at a previous overview and scrutiny meeting in this year. So we are likely to attract better people by building it in as a permanent cost. If we can reverse it out at a future date, I would be delighted to do that. And I'm sure that we'll be looking in this area for savings in the future. I guess I'd make 2 points. One is that with the £22.3 million savings proposals, it is double what we had previously delivered. And this at 1% of that amount, I think it really does require investment in order to deliver that in terms of change processes, running the projects, accountability, doing does all require that. And the other thing is that the peer challenge from the LGA did comment that our transformation resource was quite small, and we might want to try to. They weren't saying recruit loads more people because they understand the context in which we operate, but they were talking about that we should come up with ways to make it more corporately focused.
Thank you.
Chair, I have just a very quick one.
Did you want to respond to the prevent question?
Yes.
So that's the actual cost of giving the prevent service. It's a shared service, so it is kind of relatively cost efficient. But I think your question is to look for money. The answer is yes. The government are currently consulting on prevent, so they're going to expand the criteria of the referrals to include GORE and a range of other things. So while that review is ongoing, the best thing for us to do is put the actual cost of the service. We have committed to doing a review of the prevent service with adult social care and children's social care. Based on that review and the outcome of the government consultation, we'll then be able to model a service that meets our needs. So it's better to do the current cost of it, and if that reduces in the future, to reduce on that basis.
Thank you. Okay, that's very
Okay,
helpful.
I'll be very quick one. On page 43, the customer delivery, the savings document, I see the red and so the savings of this is 300. Can we just have some clarification?
Sorry, which one?
On page 43. Under the 1, 2, 3, 4.
Well, it's clearly
Fifth
red,
from the
so it's quite
bottom.
obvious
It's
it's red.
it's red.
The inbound parking debts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's red because it's proven difficult to achieve the whole saving in here.
Why?
Because not enough debts have been identified. Fewer debts have been identified in year than was expected that we've been able to move in house basically.
Surely we knew how much debt we had when we proposed it. Sorry, I'm on the right one. I shouldn't be the one asking.
Sorry. That doesn't make sense.
We did know how much debt, but we didn't know how much of it we'd be able to move in-house, and there have been and therefore make the savings that we were paying to the external bailiffs, because that's what basically the saving is, that we recover at the very in-house bailiffs rather than paying external bailiffs, and we haven't been able to in year to do enough of that. So long term, the aim is still to achieve that saving, but within 25-26, the current financial year, it's not anticipated that will be achieved, basically.
Thank you. And then one other question before we move to the next paper.
Yes, just a quick supplementary to Maxine's answer on transformations. Presumably, if an officer in one of the other directorates is tasked to work part of their time, that part of their salary can be allocated to transformation investment. Recharge, because if for instance Bo's department is asked to make a transformation or they identified and some way a member of staff works on it to make it become practical reality, the staff time invested in doing that, which then gets the return on the saving, that staff time should be identified as part of the expenditure on transformation.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. I think one of the ways in which we can enhance our kind of overall grip corporate transformation is by making sure that all departmental transformation activity is aimed at this stuff, is aimed at the programmes of work that are important to the council as a whole.
The cultural thing as well, that every member of staff actually looks for ideas for transformations in their work environment.
Yeah, and we have strengthened the kind of transformation network across the council. So where you've got people with particular professional disciplines, using children's again as an example, you need them who understand, say, the market for children's placements to be doing that transformation and having that expertise. But they need to have that connection to the central projects as well.
Thank you. I think we'll move on to this paper. We've asked some questions which we'll wait for some answers on. But I think the only recommendation that we've made is that after 6 months or so, we have a review of the voluntary redundancy scheme as a way of doing things in the future, even though it's probably likely to be a once in 5 years or once in 10 years activity. It would still be useful to know whether it has unintended consequences and if it was handled in the best way. So if we move now on to the statutory and non-statutory services provision in agenda item 6, which is divided up into the various kind of sub-specialties or sub-business groups. That gives us, I think for the first time, and this was, I'm going to invite Greg to answer the first question because this was your initiative. And I think it's been very useful for us to see. I know officers may not agree, but I think it's been very useful for us to see the split between the statutory and non-statutory services.
Thanks very much. I don't know if the lead member wants to say anything to introduce the paper before I ask the question, or indeed any of the answers.
No, I think it's incredibly useful. I think it's shone a good light on it. If anything, we now need to go further to understand where there's statutory plus that sort of
gold-plated, as we call it.
Yes, an enhancement of the statutory service. Absolutely, I know. I'm really welcome the paper, and thanks very much for producing it. I mean, given the hole we're in, looking to put it in, we really are going to have to concentrate on what's essential going forward. And this does help shine the light on what's essential, and then we can make choices around the rest. But even I, with my fanatical concentration on what's essential, and is not going to argue that we can't have an HR department just because it's not a statutory service. Of course, we have essential overheads for running a big organisation like this, and of course this department that we're scrutinising tonight, or these departments that we're scrutinising tonight, have got a high proportion of non-statutory within them. Although I perhaps question whether we should have an economy department in the council. I might not want to put the lead member on the spot by commenting on that right now, but that's the kind of thing that duplicates in other government departments. Is that something that local governments would be involved in at all when their jobs to empty the bins and deliver essential social services and election services, which you've mentioned in here, and various other things?
So I won't take to redlining departments just yet, but I suspect we will have to look at different areas.
That's the level of ruthlessness I think we need to be thinking about at the moment in this desperate situation that we're in. The other point I will just make is that I wasn't very convinced by the the way the recharging is phrased. So I think I'll just go to page 76, which is perhaps one of the clearest ways. It's if I've understood correctly, the actual cost is the audit risk fraud and insurance department is the controllable expenditure 3.6 million minus the income 1.6 million, and then that leaves a balance, and we ignore the uncontrollable budget line, which is what's recharged out to other departments, but we still have to pay it. If I got that right.
So controllable net of income and uncontrollable budget equals the net budget.
The net budget to the council.
Net of income and uncontrollable, yes.
Yeah, so the uncontrollable budget just happens to be we are spending it, it's just that it's being spent in different parts of the council, so it's a bit slightly disingenuous way of phrasing it, of expressing it, and I don't like it, it's not helpful.
And the 135 million in customer delivery presumably includes all the benefits.
Absolutely.
Presumably includes the benefits that we've had.
That's right.
Yes.
So that's a bit a complicated way of looking at it.
Yeah, so it's not being spent in other areas in the park, it's being spent on things that are the uncontrollable. And as Councillor Pascal asked earlier for more explanation on that, I think that's probably the way forward on that, what those uncontrollable budgets are, because it could be things like audit fees or things like that. So
I'm going to go to Claire and then Joanna.
Thank you. Just a very quick one. It's for Maxine. I wondered if you could, you'll be aware of the announcement today around funding. Yep. And I wondered if you could give us your explanation and take on what that means in terms of the required savings going forward for the next 3 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Jem and Mike are the ones who are, qualified to respond to that, but you've asked me directly and I'll certainly respond. So first thing to say is we got our settlement information at 4 p.m. this afternoon. So we are still working through some of the detail of how the formula that is published, because this is a brand new formula, relates to our circumstances exactly, and then also what the transition arrangement, which is kind of the dampening to mitigate the kind of polio effects, what all of those are. You would have seen in the news probably this afternoon a report on the BBC of the 6, as the headline that they use is 6 of the wealthiest councils can increase council tax more. What the mechanism for that actually is that for the 6 councils that have lower than some of the lowest council tax, of which Kensington and Chelsea is one, there are 4 other London boroughs and then 1 outside London council. Because we are very significant losers in the government's funding settlement, that there will be a requirement. If we're going to receive transitional funding, there will be a requirement on increases on the way that council tax is increased. As I say, we haven't worked through all of the detail of that yet, and I think we'll be certainly briefing as soon as we possibly can on the detail of it. But what we do know, and what I think it is worth the committee understanding, is that whilst I think there will be some transitional protection for next year that makes that moves things around a bit between years, I might be a bit more positive than that 23 million kind of loss of government funding that we'd originally put in our budget papers. What we do know is that longer term position, the funding formula itself, the underlying funding formula, doesn't make that 82 million figure any smaller at all. In fact, I think it would make it larger.
Yes.
So I'd say working through the detail of that, but it's going to be, it looks like it's upwards of 90 million.
Which is contrary to what was put out by the local MP.
Thank you. Who was next?
Me.
John.
I'm really not totally sure how to follow that, really. In part, it was related to the previous element, which is actually when I do look at the big figures here, the ones that sort of stand out are indeed customer delivery and the corporate strategy. And I found myself going, maybe I just don't understand what's in those departments, because corporate strategy is a massive figure. And you kind of go, I need I think it would be beneficial if we did really understand what sits behind that, both in terms of missions and departments, and also separately where there's cost through, as you've got with customer delivery. I suspect it's probably a follow-up.
We need, I mean, individual executive directors will know where their money is going and coming from. But for members, certainly the challenge I have is being able to follow the money through the organisation. It pops up as a recharge. You have to maintain buildings. Who's paying for that? You also have to buy desks. You have to do that. Pay the electricity bills, all of those sorts of things. Just because there's a singular person, if you were to whittle this down to a staff of one, they would still have to pick up all the recharges for maintaining the corporate estate. So we've got to actually look at some of the operational costs as well in all of this, because otherwise you're just on one side of it.
Sorry, Sydney, you can come in and then I'll. Oh, sorry, Mike, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I think in summary to it already, to all the questions and the point that Councillor Hammond made, I think this is useful information, but it does, you know, especially for a resources department, you still have to do some of these things, whether they're statutory or not. And then there's the point that Councillor Marnie made about statutory plus, and that applies more widely across the council. You just need to go into the figures more to look at one dimension is whether it's statutory or not statutory. Another dimension is whether it's necessary for organisational safety, because we've said here that the DD&T expenditure is non-statutory, but actually clearly we need it because we run systems. So it's still necessary whether it's statutory or not. And then even where it is statutory, the question is it the minimum level that we need or not? So given the challenges we're facing, we clearly have to go through that forensically. We've already started that process, already done that, some of that for this year, but we need to do that more and look at what we're doing that is statutory, but also what is necessary for organisational.
But I think we can't not look at the statutory things just because they're statutory.
No.
We need an HR department, but a smaller organisation needs a smaller HR department. It doesn't mean you simply stop looking because we put the word statutory behind it. So the eye naturally goes to non-statutory because it sounds easier, but in fact there's just as much to be saved in the statutory stuff as there is.
Is there any definition in the statutory?
Through the chat.
Sorry, in terms of statutory and non-statutory, it's statutory. It says you have to have their service, but it doesn't say what level you've got to have it.
Absolutely.
Sydney, did you?
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick question. So just looking at the non-statutory, I talk about DD&T or whatever, cyber, the operational technology seems quite high compared on page 77, 30 at the top, compared to the both setting on page 78, where the information security and compliance, just to get a sense of where that definition is coming from. That looks like an internal definition that we're using. That's not from some law about local government that you want to use. So it'd be quite important, I think, from our perspective, to understand that when you're giving us information, to know what that information pertains to, because operational technology and information security and compliance don't seem to have enough detail for us to know what you're talking about, so that we can get a sense of what is operational technology, what's included in it, what's not included in it. Because, sorry, Chair, but if, for example, we build a security operations centre to make sure that we've got cyber resilience built into what we're now doing going forward on the basis of an attack, that is an operational technology. It doesn't require us to provide family services or provide family benefit, but we need it as a fence to stop people from attacking us. So would that be included under information security compliance or operational technology? So it's not clear from the phrases that you've used on page 77 and 78 which bits are what. There's some clarity and some thinking I think needs to go in there.
Yeah, I mean, they're our internal division of the IT function, and obviously that is the biggest amount of expenditure is on operational technology, which is basically supporting the systems that support the business. So that will include it doesn't include Oracle actually, but that will include Mosaic and the housing system and all the various systems that DD&T support. But it is our it is our definition of our breakdown of the function, yes.
So for example, as a quick question, for adult social care, is there operational technology that supports adult social care that you're now saying is non-statutory? Would be included in, even though adult social care is a statutory function?
Yes, yeah, I mean, and I that's why I do think that the non-statutory statutory division is quite complicated when you apply it to functions like ED&T.
That's the point, I suppose.
So yeah, it is not statutory for us to have an adult social care system, but as you say, adult social care is a statutory service, and they would struggle to deliver it without an IT, without operational technology.
I'm conscious of time. I'm going to allow one more question.
Very quickly,
And I'm going to
just following on from Joanna and Greg. The other non-statutory big figure is the customer delivery. I mean, that's huge.
Yep.
And I mean, you know, as much as we love giving wonderful service, and I think we should continue so as a council, one has to be reviewed. And the other one was communications. The big communications on page 69.
Yes, I think customer delivery is one of those where we're behind the times on digitalization. Even we don't have a fallback functionality or automated answer phone, all sorts of things, which are actually not even behind the times. Anti-diluvian and those ones. So we've just got to catch up on all of these things. But we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want to make sure that our residents who need us face to face can still see us, but everybody else that's happy with an automated system has access to a competent one, because nothing's more frustrating than going into an endless loop with a robot.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
I'm going to draw this conclusion. I think. Sorry.
I just wondering what's the answer to the communications question for you, just because it falls under my area. So on the 4.6, there's just detail on what is statutory, because actually, even though again you don't have to have a communications department, there are a number of statutory functions that communications is required to carry out. We have benchmarked the communications function against other boroughs. And again, it comes out quite well, but there are also some savings proposals, and I'm sure in the future there will be further savings proposals that relate to that function.
Thank you. So I was going to kind of bring this to a conclusion. I think we found the statutory, non-statutory division are helpful, for example, at drawing attention to the economic development function or communications budget. But I'm not sure that, I don't know if people agree that this is necessarily the right way to present it each time. It's quite long and quite laborious. So I think maybe within our budget working group, we might add this to our list of things that we are looking at and come up with some recommendations, because I do think it might be helpful to reference the statutory and non-statutory divisions in future budget papers as a matter of course, just as we've introduced, various measurements and stuff to help us to understand things better.
Is there a sort of caveat on that, that breaking down into statutory versus non-statutory is not a straightforward, completely black and white? There is some nuance. So
I think we'll take that into account when we discuss it.
Because I just wanted to sort of caveat your point, which I agree with, that there is a danger that we might then think, oh, this is black and white.
Yeah, and we also don't want to create a whole extra industry, although once we've categorised it, it's pretty straightforward. It won't change very much. But that's why I said, rather than discuss it here about how we'd like to see it in future, we take it away and discuss it in the budget working group, and anybody else is welcome to contribute to that discussion. Will.
Question. If we have a look also at how effective our procurement is, because, for instance, in FCS,
I think that's going to be in our budget working group.
It's going to be in the budget working group, but I've just one of the things that come after this really big example.
Just to say, we are tracking now cost avoidance, sort of savings, and even things that we've said.
I'm going to bring this to a point, because we are going to discuss it elsewhere. And say thank you very much for coming. The officers, we're going to just look at the scrutiny watch program now, and the forward plan and good decisions. Eight.
Yes.
95. Now we decided that we're not going to call through the photos in future. We're just going to shout out if anybody's got anything that they'd like to take on. Toby, I hope you're with us on this point. Joanna.
Page 98, I have as a ward councillor put together those streetscape scheme. Which is the reflecting my own.
I'm sure you're on the council, I think.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah, please go on.
134 Constantine Council Craft, more details of that. It's in Camden Ward.
Is that as a ward councillor?
Yes.
Yeah.
134.
And could we have some more information on Hall Park as well, please?
Which page is that on?
Same, right.
Ward councillor.
What is an annual resilience report? And should that come towards?
That's what we discussed regularly at the last meeting, and Mary discussed with Gerard, and it's going to the audit and the transparency.
Perhaps you could put a comment in the book. That's
Didn't you circulate it? That one circulated, was that we might, I'll check, you've circulated it, because it did.
Okay, Douglas, okay, anyone running more, my label, check resident.
Yeah, I had a question on 114 with the procurement award of a borough-wide 18-month interim agreement responsive repairs and void works borough-wide. I didn't know how that fitted with HCSC repairs paper.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. I mean, we've just been talking about procurement, and I do feel and see certainly within housing and properties.
Thanks, Mike.
Procurement and contract management jointly, I think, are contributing to costs and necessary services. So, given that we have repairs piece on our.
So do you want to look at that one
Yeah.
at your committee or just
to our members?
No, just
Yeah,
just the members.
just to the committee, I think. No, it doesn't have to be an agenda item.
Thank you.
Anyone,
yeah, John has another.
118, the bottom one, creating an RBKC housing company for new homes, including market housing.
I have that in a different page.
It goes on to 2 pages. No, it doesn't, it's on 118, just back on there. What did you want with that? So the RBKC housing company.
I'd like to see it be briefed on it.
Well, that one.
No, I'm talking to Claire.
Which page are you, which page?
I'm on page 118. It's the very last point.
There you are, I was looking at the next page.
All right, creating an RBKC housing company for new homes, including market rent housing.
Again, it's something,
Yes, so
it's something to do with Westminster.
So it's
collecting.
it's
Three people talking to me, I'm confused, right?
Sorry.
That's all right. Do we want it to, you think it should come to this?
I think, no, I think we as housing
make
members
sure
would
that
like
we
to
are
see it.
brief.
So circulate it
I
to the
think we need to
committee.
keep a watching brief on that and request update.
Okay.
Because when that was initially billed as a KD, that piece of work was meant to be temporary accommodation, and it was in the small print and or private rented. But I think we do need to keep an eye. Thank you, Joanna.
And I have one question.
Yeah, go on.
Which is a key decision changed to an executive decision. What does that mean?
It's about the authority to take the decision. So, I just want to,
Anything to do with the budget?
Yeah, budget. Or sometimes the,
So that means that members won't see it unless they ask for it. Is that right?
That's right, but you can still ask for it.
No,
I will comment on it,
No, I
but I
was
think
fine.
what usually happens is we have a strategy that's the key decision, and then when it comes to award contracts, that's depending on the value, when it can move to an executive decision, but you can see it.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Just to say, the annual resilience report was circulated to members last week, but I can recirculate it if needed.
Filed it, Norton. Thank you, Lou.
Yeah, I've just got two quick ones, which are page 1, 2, 4 and 1, 2, 4. Which is the temporary accommodation placement policy and the private rented sector discharge policy. And I would like the committee, if possible, to have a briefing note on that, specifically in the context of what the leeway is within this legislation.
Okay, so you did get a briefing note, it says here, on the 20th of November on the temporary accommodation. Oh, we haven't got it yet.
Yeah.
Right, sorry.
Okay.
We'll chase that.
And if that can be included with the next one as well, on the private rented.
Sorry, did you say, I'm sorry, Claire.
Yeah.
Leeway for.
Say, so,
Briefing note. For those two.
yeah, so I'm interested in what bits of the policy are tweakable and what bits are statutory, nailed down in legislation. How much room for manoeuvre is there, if you like? And the same that we've already requested for temporary accommodation for private rented discharge policy. Yep. Okay, got that. Thank you.
Any other comments? Then we've got the work programme.
Just that you've got the budget at the next meeting. Transformations and savings, and I just remind everybody on the piece, there is the second workshop on transformation in January.
Good. In which case, in the absence of any other urgent business, I bring the meeting to a close. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.